started. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to tell you guys about the Hyksos people who have been interpreted very differently over the last 3,000 years. I am hoping to do a little bit of historiography for you guys. And if you don't know what historiography is, it is essentially the history of how people have studied history. History of history. And so we're going to look at how people have interpreted the Hyksos people in the past and then how we now interpret them, because we have a very different perspective of them nowadays. We're also going to talk about their capital city of Varus in the Nile Delta, and we're going to chat about some of the archaeological work that has been conducted. We're going to look at some imagery of the Hyksos. We're going to look at some sort of names of the Hyksos people, and yeah, I'm excited. This is something that people ask me about all the time, and I will say I feel much more prepared to kind of answer questions about the Hyksos, because I will say I do tend to get mixed up between the Hyksos people and the Sea Peoples, which are not remotely the same, but they are two non-Egyptian groups that appear in intermediate periods. So we're going to look at these guys, which are in the second intermediate period, and the Sea Peoples are, I believe, in the third intermediate period, but I might be wrong. It might be the first. The Sea Peoples I know even less about, and so I feel like I'm much more prepared to talk about the Hyksos people now that we've done this lecture. Or now that I have prepared this lecture for you guys, and now we will do it. So let's get started. So who were the Hyksos? We're going to go the very, very basics. Timocade? I don't know. And we don't know positively where the Sea Peoples came from. There's a lot of different theories, and this lecture is about the Hyksos and not about the Sea Peoples. Maybe that's going to have to be our next lecture, because I am not even caught up on any of the theories. I'm pretty sure Phoenicians is one of them, but I am not 100% sure, because there are so many. But yes, so we have the Hyksos people, and we'll talk about the very, very basics, and then we'll go into more detail, obviously. So who are they, and why do we talk about these peoples in the context of ancient Egypt? Very, very distinctly, because I am looking at this with very much an ancient Egyptian lens. I am not looking at this really from a Near Eastern perspective. I can give you as much information as I know about them when they lived in the Near East. We are specifically today talking about the people who lived in Egypt, and the context kind of around that. So the Hyksos people were the rulers of the 15th dynasty of Egypt, and that is during the second intermediate period, which is approximately 1650 to 1550 BC, about 100 years. They did not control all of Egypt. They were mainly coexisting with the 16th and the 17th dynasties, who were a native ancient Egyptian dynasty based in the south in Thebes. Otherwise, you sometimes hear them called the Theban dynasties. Hello, Avocado. Welcome on in. We just got started, so you didn't miss anything. So the Hyksos are based in the north. They are mainly in the Nile Delta, and then a little bit south of the Nile Delta, but not much. And their capital city was a city called Avaris, which is currently located at the Tel El Daba site. And we will talk so much about this. And I even have a blog post that you guys can read if you want to know more about Tel El Daba. They were the first not foreign rulers in ancient Egyptian history. But many of the details of their rule, such as the extent of their kingdom and even the name and even the order of the kings, remain uncertain. And a lot of this we're kind of talking about is a lot of conjecture, a lot of hypotheses, and so it is very hard. I'm so glad, Avocado. You can pick whichever one you are. Which one are you right now? Oh, you're Sobek. You can pick whichever god or goddess you have, but if you like Sobek, you can keep him. Absolutely. I'm so glad. Yeah, the Hyksos, I feel like, are very quickly covered in schools, but I don't know how accurately they're being, like, talked about, just because it's such a short time period, and, like, schools more often than not cannot talk about ancient Egypt for more than usually, like, a week. Gravity, not much. We're just going over the very basics, and we will repeat. The quick thing is that they are a foreign nation that were the rulers of the 15th dynasty that were coexisting at the same time of the 16th and 17th dynasties, which is not how dynasties work in Egypt pretty much at all. This is almost the exception to the rule. Usually it's every dynasty follows each one, like follows back and forth. This is like up in the north is technically sometimes Hyksos are sometimes considered also the 14th dynasty. We'll talk about it a little bit, but like 14th and 15th dynasty up in the north, and the 16th and 17th dynasties are in the south, and they are ruling at Egypt at the exact same time, just different sections. And these are the first foreign rulers of Egypt. Yes, Silver, and we're going to talk about that. But yeah, they have been very much interpreted as these mysterious bad guys, and I want to read more like historical fiction, and one of the things I'm actually going to talk about at the very, very end, we'll leave for discussion, is why I think this time period would have been cooler to have Assassin's Creed Origins set in. I would have kind of rather had this or the Harem Conspiracy. Those are kind of the two ones that I was like, I feel like this time period would have been more interesting. And we'll talk about that at the very, very end of the lecture as kind of a random discussion point. So the Hyksos people may have been essentially credited with introducing a lot of different technologies to Egypt, as well as like other inventions. And so they have been credited for the horse, sometimes for the chariot. We'll talk about that in a little bit, as well as the khopesh or the sickle sword, and maybe even the composite bow, though a lot of this is still disputed. And what we know is that they were not originally from Egypt. Like that has always been and is still true, that they are not originally from Egypt but settled into the Delta area. But who they were and where they came from and how they came into Egypt has been debated for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we will go over all of the different theories and options shortly, though the unfortunate thing is really nothing is definitive. I think the results that we have, kind of the hypotheses that we have now, are very strong. But this is a time period where very, very little things were recorded. Intermediate periods are really hard to kind of extract information from because the pharaohs were not very powerful and thus did not have the resources to really splurge on art or tombs or huge temples with writing everywhere. Like they didn't have those resources, and so they had to focus on just like living pretty much. And there are these essentially then gaps in our knowledge, because you can take a lot away from archaeology, but a lot of what we have from ancient Egypt does come from texts and does come from huge monuments and such. So without totally spoiling it, but I have to spoil it because we'll talk about this, but because the Hyksos did not control all of Egypt, they eventually fight with the pharaohs of the late 17th dynasty for control over the entirety of Egypt. And this will eventually culminate in their defeat by Pharaoh Ahmose I, who later begins the 18th dynasty. And this is the dynasty that has Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, and then getting to the early that leads into the early Ramesside period. And we'll talk about some of the different primary sources for the war, and we'll talk about what we actually know of the war and what is talked about for the war. But what you would expect with the Egyptians is that following this war, the ancient Egyptian pharaohs would portray the Hyksos as bloodthirsty and oppressive foreign rulers. That's just typical for a lot of ancient cultures, but especially the Egyptians, who will take their propaganda everywhere and will sugarcoat and embellish like everything that they've ever done. So it's not victors dictate history. I have that written in here somewhere. Like, exactly. So we kind of know and expect like what happens with this. And it is, I don't talk about it really much, but that they are the first of these historians who are essentially recording the information about the Hyksos that we have, and that from their basis is where we get a lot of the misinformation about the Hyksos, for sure. So let's dive in, and first we're going to talk about the name Hyksos, or the name that essentially has been given to them by the Egyptians. So the Hyksos name is most likely not the actual thing that they called themselves. And this applies to pretty much most names or words for foreign nations outside of Egypt, is that we don't have the actual name of what those cultures are. And it honestly goes back and forth. If you guys have ever heard of it's not I always call it an Amarna letter. You might remember me talking about it. We had a discussion stream about it, and it's not an Amarna letter, but it is a letter that is found from the deeds of Sup-Ili Uma the First in the Near East, and it's a letter. It's a recording of a letter that they received from an Egyptian queen. And literally, instead of writing the Egyptian queen's name, the only name they use is the title, is literally like they essentially put together the title of king's wife. What would that be? That would be Nesu Hemet. Or Hemet Nesu. They just say Queen Hemet Nesu. That's what they say her name is. And so, like, on both sides of these ancient cultures, they aren't really recording the actual names for these, Queen Mrs. Pharaoh. Like, it's literally, it's enough for them to know, but it's not what it actually is. And this goes along with, like, Cush and Nubia. Nubia is an Egyptian word. Nub means gold. It means the land of gold. That is not what the Nubians probably called themselves. Cush is closer, but it's like all of these things are not actually the same of what somebody themselves would call them. And again, remember, we're also 5,000 years. Exactly. Hungarians are Magyars. Like, that is still something today, is that there are different words in your own language for your culture, and then other languages for other languages as well. So you think about that and you're like, who the fuck is a Magyar? Like Deutschland and stuff like that. So, ooh, Inoxims, names given from the outside for people or countries. Thank you, Charlie. That is a great vocab word that I'm never going to remember again. New word. I'm gonna have to remember that. That's a great word, because I talk about this a lot. Yeah, Sami. Yeah, there's so many. There's a ton of Native American groups that I'm sure are similar to that. Like, I think if I remember correctly, like Mohawk does not describe a particular tribe. It describes a series of tribes. There's a lot of these things that just happen, and it's I am also Magyar. In storytelling, that's so cool. We love Hungarians here. We're a Hungarian happy family over here. Not saying what the English call it, the Irish call the English. Hi, Carrie. Welcome on in. We are doing a lecture about the Hyksos people from ancient Egypt. So please settle on in and have a listen. Yes, exactly, Charlie. It's like there are these words that other cultures create about other cultures, and they are usually very inaccurate. I mean, think Indians when you're talking about Native Americans, because they thought they had gotten to India. So the Hyksos name is not really what it is. And you guys would be very surprised that these hieroglyphs actually just says Heka Kasut. And that is the actual Egyptian word, or Hekakasu or Hekakasut. And this word literally means ruler of foreign country. Ruler or rulers of foreign countries. That is what this name means in ancient Egyptian. It is not specific to anyone at first. And then this in Greek derives to Hyksos, which is why we call them the Hyksos. But you can say Hekakasut. You can use that as well if you're talking about the Hyksos. And some of the earliest scholars that talk about them include a scholar named Josephus, who we'll talk about more next. And he interpreted the word Hyksos as shepherd kings or captive shepherds. Hyk meaning king and sos meaning shepherds, though it is completely unclear what language he actually meant this to be translating from. He calls it the sacred language. I'm going to assume it is Hebrew because he is a Jewish historian. So that's what we're going to assume. I do not speak Hebrew. I cannot confirm or deny. Endonym is a word for what a group calls themselves and usually means something like the people, the proper people in their language. Yeah, so Kemet, some people will say, oh, Kemet is the ancient Egyptian endonym, but it actually literally means the Black Land. But when you put the two little people and the little strokes after it, it means the people of the Black Land. And so it literally is not 100%, but you're gonna see some really interesting theory that Josephus has about the Hyksos people in just a second. That blew my mind this morning when I was typing that up because I wasn't gonna include it and I was like, wait, I have to include this because this is wild. But I don't doubt that he is part of it. I don't doubt he is part of that. He might be. I gotta look into him a little bit more, but he translated a lot of early texts and such. So about Egypt, about Rome, about a lot of other places. So Josephus's rendition might be because the Egyptians after the Second Intermediate Period begin to pronounce Hekahasut as Hekashasu. And this was understood to mean Lord of Shepherds, but again, not sure who actually translated that. TikTok, calm down. Thank you. Okay. I love it. Yeah, Sumerians, black-headed people. Yeah, so a lot of these, they have their own, usually very simple names. And it usually has nothing to do with, like, a country name, almost. Like, it becomes the country name, but it's, like, the actual translation is usually very simple. And so, we don't understand who translated Hekashasu as Lord of Shepherds. I hate to say it. I'm gonna say this because I feel like this is just a thing. I have a weird feeling that they looked at that crook and they said, oh, it's a shepherd's crook. Even though it is technically a crook, but it is not a shepherd's crook. It is the crook and flail, which if you've ever seen like the ancient Egyptian king with a crook and flail, the crook's really short. It's not like a full staff. So like, I have a weird feeling that Manetho or Josephus not being able to read ancient Egyptian, although Manetho probably could, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit. But like, I have a feeling they looked at that and they said, oh, that looks like a shepherd's crook. So that's just me. So even though this term can be technically used for many different foreign foes, because it literally just means, again, ruler of a foreign nation, academically, this is pretty much used only to talk about foreign rulers of the Second Intermediate Period, which is sometimes why like we still use Hyksos rather than Hekakasut, because we are really trying to like academically, if we say Hyksos, we are not meaning the rulers of all these foreign nations. We're only talking about these rulers of the Second Intermediate Period who are in the Delta. And while there are technically the 14th and the 15th dynasty, this is also mostly focused on the 15th dynasty. Again, rather than this whole group of people. Some academics still use it as an ethnic term, but nowadays it really should only be referenced to those in Egypt at that time. Because, again, we don't know what term these people used outside of Egypt. And so really should only be like this. I am not a crook. Wow. Hi, Dorian Gray. Welcome on in. That was a great joke. Avocado. I am not a crook. I will note some Hyksos kings use this word on their inscriptions, which you can see here. And this has led some scholars to believe that the Hyksos kings used a Hekakasut as a title themselves. So you can see here the scarabs of King Semken and Kayan, and they both have the word Hyksos at the very beginning of their cartouche, which is essentially the entire scarab, back of the scarab. Now, the weird thing is that Sekhem is considered a lesser Hyksos king from one of the earlier dynasties, but Danish Egyptologist Kim Reihold argues that it was actually never an official title because it never appears with the royal titulary. Like when they are writing out the entire royal titulary, it's never included there. It's only kind of included on these random the 3 dashes means it's, so listen carefully when you hear the difference, is there is Hekakasu and Hekakasut. And the U sound at the very, very end is a plural for rulers. And so it's Hekakas, I guess it's Hekakas and a or no, I gotta look that again. It might be Hekakasut, Hekakas, because the U sound usually means plural and the T usually means feminine, as a feminine ending. But it also might be, God, is that the fucking stative? That might be a grammar thing that I'm forgetting, is that ut is an ending of something. But it essentially, each of those strokes, whenever you see 3 strokes, it means a multiple of something. It is a multiplier of something. If you see 1 stroke, it is usually indicating that we're talking about this thing that is depicted in the glyphs. Thank you so much, Carrie. Have a great rest of your night. Oh my gosh, go to bed. Go to bed. This will all eventually be on my YouTube, probably in like the next week or so. So you can tune back in and you can see it fully on everything. But thank you so much for stopping by. Yes, so it's ruler versus rulers of a foreign nation, which is also odd because why would you have it being plural in front of the person's name? It's very interesting. This word is, I feel like it takes on a whole new meaning, and I think it doesn't help that the Hyksos people like obviously understood enough of ancient Egyptian, but you can assume or probably assume that they didn't speak ancient Egyptian when they came here. And so I wonder if this is just them seeing this phrase like around and just immediately copying it without actually sort of knowing what it means. It could be a surname. We're going to talk about that when we talk about imagery, but it could be it's probably quite literally saying Semken the Hyksos, or Kayan. Yeah, Kayan the Hyksos. It's not spelled Kayan, it's spelled Khyan, but I feel like that's the only Kayan is how you say that. But yeah, so one of the Egyptologists, Kim Reihold, argues that it was never an official title because it never appears in the royal titulary. And she believes that it's this generic term that is encountered separately from the royal titulary, and it is found in King's List after the 15th dynasty. And we'll talk about King's List a little bit later as well. What am I? I'm just grabbing something. Okay. Okay. So there are 2 alternate names that have been used in reference to the Hyksos, but also can just be more general terms. And I wanted to kind of introduce those to you guys as well. So the one on the left is Amu, or Aamu, and the one on the right is Reted. How am I going to say that? Reteniu. Reteniu. We're gonna do that. So Aamu is usually used to mean Asiatics, so people from Asia. And when we say Asia in reference to ancient Egypt, we're meaning the Near East. We're not really meaning all the way to India, all the way to China. Like, we're meaning people in the Near East. and maybe getting to like Pakistan, Iran, like that's what we mean by Asiatics, and is thus like a very broad term for those living anywhere past the Sinai Peninsula. This is one of the most common terms that the Egyptians used to reference the Hyksos after the 18th dynasty. Though, on the Turin Kings list, in which the Hyksos kings are surprisingly included, which is shocking to me that they are included on this kings list, the kings' names don't have any cartouches, like the other kings, and all they have is a throw stick. So that first glyph on the left, that's like a throw stick. It's sort of a boomerang, but not really. Asia Minor 2, I would say yes. It probably includes like Turkey, the Levant, because obviously you have to think of some modern person is translating these words, and so obviously Asia did not exist when the ancient Egyptians like were alive. So this is a modern person who's looking at text, trying to find a definition for the word, and they are going to then say Asiatics when they know that they didn't get all the way to like China or Japan or have any contact with people on that side. So I would assume we're going to include not Europe, so not Greece, not the other part of the Mediterranean, but we're going to include Asia Minor. We're going to include Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and then over into Mesopotamia as well. And all of that, pretty much everything past the Sinai Peninsula, because you got to remember that's their only connection, unless they go to the other side of the Saudi Arabia peninsula. If the previous glyphs meant general as in military terms. No, not in military terms, like general as in the norm. But no. Yeah, so Mesopotamia is going to be like one half of Asiatics are going to be considered Mesopotamians. It's kind of a mixture people of the Levant. If you haven't heard that word Levant is a word for essentially what would that be? The most eastern Mediterranean coast. So again, like parts of Syria, parts of Jordan, parts of Palestine, parts of Israel. And I think it's an outdated term, and I don't think people use it as much. I did not know of that term until literally I took a class on it when I went and studied abroad in London. And I think it is a term that is more often used in Europe than it is in America. But the Near East. So the Near East does also include Mesopotamia. As some people would say, which is also an outdated term and should not be used, the Orient, which is so weird because I feel like the Orient, the way that I have always associated that word is with Japan and China, but it actually is specifically like supposed to be the Near East. Anything that is outside of, it's not Africa, but it's not Europe, and it's kind of starts in that area. Yeah. So back to what I was saying. So yeah, so this Aamu is this general term, very, very broad, and we know that it is sometimes used, and that throw stick has been included in the Hyksos pharaohs' names on the Turin Kings list, even though they are not in cartouches. So in the mindset of the Egyptian who's writing this Turin Kings list, they are not kings. They are not Egyptian kings, but they are foreigners. By putting that little stick, they are labeling them as foreigners. But they are still including them on the list, which usually is something that the Egyptians did not do. When they didn't like somebody, they did not include them on the list. So the retinue is an even more obscure term. It's slightly more specific to reference a group of peoples in the Near East, possibly in the area of northern Syria. So it is an area, like, it is definitely not Mesopotamia, and it's more closer to the Levant, but it is implied that it is more northern. And this word is used a lot more and not always associated with the Hyksos people themselves. And when I say Hyksos people themselves, I mean the people living in Egypt in the 15th dynasty. But this could be a good quote-unquote origin of those Hyksos people. And so sometimes it is used kind of in that reference and such. And both of these are talked about in kind of the same circles. For example, Pharaoh Kamos, who is the last king of the 17th dynasty, refers to the Hyksos king Apepi as chieftain of the retinue. That's literally how he refers to him, even though Hyksos could have been used in that same context. This could imply that the Hyksos king had a Levantine background, or it just further tells us that the word for Hyksos covers a lot of different people. And so it's very, very kind of complicated in that way. All right. Water break. No, Dorian Gray. They are more than likely from east of the Delta. And we'll talk more about that in reference, but yes. No, there are other words in ancient Egyptian for like Libyans. Libyans is a word. I don't know what the ancient Egyptian word for it is, but they definitely knew the difference between a Libyan and a Near Eastern person. When you look at like the what is it? The 9 bows. So the 9 bows are meant to be the 9 enemies of Egypt that are referenced very often. You have Libyans, Asiatics, Nubians. Those are like the major 3. There's I can't remember. Those are the major 3 that are always kind of referenced by that general name. And then there are smaller groups that are also kind of will fulfill like Asiatics. But those are like the big 3 that the Egyptians are always fighting is the Libyans, the Nubians, and the Asiatics. But again, there are so many of these terms that can distinguish the difference in Asiatic people because there are so many different versions. So let's, before we talk about all the theories and stuff, let's look at how they are depicted, because I want you guys to kind of get some imagery in your mind, because I'm gonna apologize. There's so little imagery, so I have to talk about it before we figure it out. I'm just seeing that there's gonna be an ad in 50 seconds. Okay. First, what we're going to talk about is how the Hyksos people are depicted by the Egyptians, and then we are going to talk about how the Hyksos people themselves depicted themselves. And I want to tell you there is a very distinct difference, and it's unfortunately very unclear because that's just going to be the big precursor, is that we don't know. We don't know. Instead of the more we know, though, we don't know anything. Because it's just really, really hard for this time period to know what's going on. All right, we're going to take a snack break where I'm not going to talk for like a minute. Because there's an ad. I'm trying very good. I can't talk. People on TikTok, there's an ad on my Twitch, so I have to be quiet so that people don't miss anything for my lecture. Except it's not telling me there's an ad. Is there an ad? Thank you, Cassidy. It told me it's gonna start, but it's not starting. It told me there was an ad, but it has not started. See, this is not my fault. Because this thing... There we go. It's only a 30-second ad. Now it comes up. Still waiting for the ad. Are we back? That should have been a how many corn nuts can I eat in 30 seconds? Alright. I'm sorry, they're so loud. But I have to crunch them all up or else I'm gonna choke. Alright. I'm gonna call it there. Alright, so how were the Hyksos people depicted by the Egyptians? And in general, we have very, 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 very little confirmed imagery of them. The most famous is going to be this image you see here. So the image on the top is the actual image, and the image on the bottom is a kind of bad reconstruction, but we'll make do. So this is arguably the most famous. It is arguably the most preserved. It is arguably also not them. And this is going to sound really silly, but it is definitely, if we are going with the definition of what a Hyksos is, and we are saying that it is a 15th dynasty foreign ruler of Egypt, this is 100% not images of them. And this is where we're going to confuse everybody. So this tomb dates to the 12th dynasty, and it is found in Beni Hassan. It is the tomb of Khnumhotep II, a nomarch in Beni Hassan. And Beni Hassan is kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of in between Cairo and Luxor on the Nile, which is not a great precursor because they're so far apart. But it's on the Nile and kind of in the middle of Egypt. And again, because this comes from the 12th dynasty, we know that this is not technically depicting any of the actual rulers of the 15th dynasty. But there's a very important reason as to why we think this group is a depiction of an earlier Hyksos group, and who may have settled in the Delta before they actually ruled the Delta. Nope. Sorry. So the image shows a group of West Asiatic foreigners visiting the pharaoh and bringing him gifts. The text above them, which is right over here, labels them as the Aamu, which we talked about is this kind of general term for Asiatics. And then this man at the beginning here, who's leaning over this, I always forget if it's I think it's an oryx because it's got the curved, or goat, one of those. He has his own hieroglyphs next to him, and as you can see, if you can see, this is very familiar because it is literally that image. That is literally the image that I showed you. So it labels him specifically as Abisha the Hyksos, or Abisha Heka Kasu. So Abisha is down here, and Heka Kasu, meaning Abisha the Hyksos. All of this would have been occurring during the reign of Senusret II, around 1890 BCE. They do look very Mediterranean. They do. They have a lot of similarities, I think, with outfits to the Minoans. So one option to think about. But technically, it's hard to think about sometimes, but technically, like, areas of Israel and parts of Syria are Mediterranean. They are on the Mediterranean Sea. And so some people, I feel like they don't get included as much when you're looking at, like, the whole Mediterranean, is that, like, they're on the coast. Like, these could have been coastal people from the Mediterranean, but they're over in the Levant rather than being in Greece or over in Northern Africa. Thank you, Dorian Gray. This will eventually be up on my YouTube so you can watch the whole entire thing. So essentially, if you're ever going to talk about the Hyksos, and if you're ever going to Google the Hyksos, this is the image that is going to be used. But there's a lot of problems with using this image. We don't have evidence that this is the same group that eventually becomes the rulers of the Nile Delta. We don't even have evidence that these are the people who settled in the Nile Delta, even if they didn't become the actual rulers. This is at least, what, 200 to 300 years before the Hyksos people? And to top it all off, you also always have to take ancient Egyptian imagery with a grain of salt, because it is hard to know what they changed for it to become more idealistic, for it to become more like, these are their tombs. This is not meant to be accurate. It is not meant to be realistic. It is meant to be something. All of their art has a function. And in this case, it is probably, like, obviously this is an image of people giving tribute to the pharaoh. It is probably talking about how Khnum-Hotep himself somehow instigated this trade between these nations or something. It is, Khnum-Hotep is not just showing an event that happened to the pharaoh. He is talking about something that he probably did personally, because it is trying to show that he is this elite member of society, and why, pretty much. So you always have to keep the things in mind when you're looking at this. It's just, you can never really take anything at face value when you're talking about ancient Egyptian art. But you can see they definitely have bows, they have donkeys, they have these brightly colored outfits, they have very different styles of hair that you can see. I especially love these two little babies sitting on top of this donkey. But you can see the distinct difference between the two men here in front and the other men and the women in this group, and the kind of art style of how it is different. Another famous image of a probable Hyksos is on this ceremonial axe head from Pharaoh Ahmose I. We'll talk about the end of the Hyksos at this lecture, but let's just say Ahmose is very heavily involved. I already mentioned he is the one who essentially takes them down officially. So this is an absolutely gorgeous axe head, and there actually is the wooden piece of the axe found, and you have this depiction of Ahmose I in a smiting pose, in a smiting motif. And this is a super common, although a slight variation of the smiting motif, where the pharaoh is holding the hair of the enemy, and usually he has his hand up behind him holding a scythe, a mace, something, about to smite this enemy. In this case, I think they just ran out of room, so they couldn't put the arm behind him, so he has like the arm down with this enemy. But because we know that Ahmose is the person who so that's the thing, Silver. We have no idea. It's just possible. It does look closer to... I do agree with you. I think it looks a little bit more Nubian. But I don't think there's enough details to really distinguish. I think he's kind of generic, to be honest. Especially because it's all in gold. So it's like really hard to kind of tell who it could possibly be. But we assume that it might be the Hyksos just because we know that Ahmose I was the person to defeat them. And so if this axe was made in celebration of his defeat of the Hyksos, you could probably say that it would be the Hyksos person getting depicted. But there's no text on it that tells us that it is that, so it's hard to tell. But yeah, there's not really enough identifying features. I do think in general, when you look at the face, it looks like a Nubian, but even the outfit, there's really nothing to kind of see. There's nothing really to kind of tell you what it is. Making sure I said everything. All right. We also have this image of of a group of people labeled as the retinue. So again, we're covering all of those words that have been used. Yes, Silver. you're very good. I'm actually gonna go back to that. You're very good to point this out. This is very much not in the canon of proportions, which is the ancient Egyptian like style of art. This is very much not in. They're so thin in comparison, and I think it is more because of, one, you're coming out of a period where there were not very strong there was not strong leadership, so there was not strong court art. There was not really anything like that, and so they're just going with what they go with, and then the standardization will come back eventually, and they'll kind of establish those again. But yeah, it is very much, the proportions are good, but he's very tall and they're very thin, and it's just not the standard that you see in a lot of other ancient Egyptian art. His ear is also massive for the pharaoh. His ear is like half the size of his face. I think the faces are what's really suffering with this canon of oh my god, proportions. I can't speak. So, as I said, this is a depiction of peoples that are in this text above here labeled as the retinue. This comes from the tomb of Rekhmire. It dates to the 18th dynasty, so we are talking after the Hyksos people. This is around 1450 BCE. And this is labeled as the retinue bringing tribute to King Thutmose III. These tributes do include an elephant. If you see him here, he's a little small, but that's fine. And what has been called a Syrian bear. I'm 99% sure there's also another image of a giraffe, but that might be technically in the, oh my god, what's the word for it? It's not in the row. In the row above, there's another group of people that are bringing offerings, and I think that technically is, I think that's where the giraffe is. And so you also got horses, and you have the chariot, and this makes much more sense because horses are coming from the West. They're coming from Western Asia at that time. So they are, I'm just trying to check. These guys are pretty pale here in the front, but interestingly, these guys have darker skin. It's very odd. It's very, this reconstruction at the bottom is not that great. Hi, Pandarius. Welcome on in. Thank you for the follow. I'm an Egyptologist. You're here, baby. This is all we do. Not all we do, but this is what we do a lot. But welcome on in. Yeah, I'm Melissa. I'm in denial in more ways than one. We do a lecture series from March to October where I give one lecture about ancient Egypt a month, and then I get a guest lecture to come on once a month. So this is my lecture for June. We're talking about the Hyksos people. All of my previous lectures are getting posted on YouTube, and all of my previous guest lectures are already posted on YouTube. So you can always see any of the old stuff that we're doing. But we also play video games during the week. They're not Egypt themed, but they're always history themed. But usually the weekends we either do a discussion stream or we do a lecture. So welcome on in. We're talking about imagery of the Hyksos people, and we're looking at all these different kind of versions of what could be the Hyksos people, and these are specifically how ancient Egyptians have depicted them. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad you followed. Feel free to join the Discord. We talk about Egypt all the time. Or follow me on TikTok. If you're on TikTok or if you're on YouTube, I've been posting all of my TikToks on YouTube, which is all so much stuff. So much stuff. Hi, Kepper! I want a corn nut now. No, you posted that. Corn nut. So, as I said before, this is from the tomb of Rekhmire. Dates to the 18th dynasty after the Hyksos. These people are labeled as the retinue, which are these Asiatics. The retinue are a little bit more specific. Potentially northern Syria is where we kind of are. It's not clear, but this could be them. This could be them afterwards. Obviously, it is not. Again, we're going off of the definition that the Hyksos people are specifically, when we are talking about them academically, They are specifically the rulers of the 15th dynasty. So it obviously can't be them because we're after, but hi Tapir, welcome on in. I'm so glad you guys are here. Where was I? So yeah, so based on the timing, these could technically be people who came to Egypt in the 15th dynasty and stayed. This could be a different group of people who were related to the Hyksos, but they didn't live in Egypt. Like, these could be related, but we are never going to really know. So the unfortunate conclusion is we have very little images of the Hyksos people from the Egyptians themselves. Probably, again, because this is during the Second Intermediate period where the pharaoh and the government are not very, very strong, and thus cannot keep up with court art, create temples. Like, think about this. If this was the Ramesside period, where they are really strong and they want to build huge monuments to themselves, we would have so many images of the Hyksos plastered on a giant temple wall. But that's not where we're at right now. They were not very powerful. They were not able to kind of create any of this stuff. So, do we have any evidence of the Hyksos depicting themselves in art? Very little. Unfortunately, still very, very little. Because the same exact thing kind of comes to it, that they did not really create much court art. So, Hyksos artifacts are mostly found in Avaris, which we are going to talk about next. I know this looks like Toad. He does, like, very much look like Toad. And the site of Avaris is not very well preserved. And then obviously they were either wiped out or they were kicked out of Egypt, so not much was left in this city either. And so one example we have is this fragmented statue from Avaris, and it depicts this official in this mushroom-headed hairstyle. It is supposed to be a hairstyle and not a hat. We're going to be clear on that. But from what we have preserved, which is obviously not much, everyone just gonna look at the face for a little bit. This face looks very similar to ancient Egyptian art faces. It seems to be relatively symmetrical. It seems to be relatively in proportion. I think it has very much like these almond-shaped eyes that you actually see like much later in the 18th dynasty. But it looks relatively nice, where I know I've told you guys this before, but intermediate period art, if you're trying to figure out if something is from the intermediate period and you stumble across a piece of art and it just looks Egyptian, but it kind of looks bad, that's going to be one of the intermediate periods. Because again, they don't have the money to hire the best artists who can develop all of these amazing pieces, and then they can decide what is our style going to be like. They don't have that. So they're making art. They're just struggling through it. Some people call it a dark age, where they're also losing those talents. I don't really like using that word, but it does happen, obviously. Like, they are not passing these things down as frequently because they are literally just trying to survive. Like, craftsmanship is just not, they need the minimum. They cannot do all the extra things. Yeah, I agree, Cassidy. It's very much like similar. Like, I would look at that and I would say, yeah, that looks Egyptian. It looks a little weird. Kind of how you determine intermediate period stuff. But yeah, we also know that, like, when you kind of look at it, it sort of reflects the hairstyle that you actually see on some of these men in the image from the 12th dynasty, which is obviously not going to be perfect, but I think it's relatively good. Like, obviously we're looking at a 2D image versus a 3D image, but like a floof, like think of like a 70s floof haircut. It's kind of looks like a mushroom. Because you can't do that in like, what is this? Probably limestone or marble or something. It looks very, very similar to some of the imagery that we already have. It's very hard to do so, yes, because of obviously flatness, but they got a floof. They got some floof. For sure. So what this statue definitely tells you is that there is this combination of Egyptians and Hyksos working together and probably living together enough to combine artistic styles, because you can see that this looks very Egyptian. And so this is going slightly away from the invaders versus settlers conversation, which we're going to have more of. But I wanted to show you guys imagery of them first. We also have this electrum dagger handle that appears to have been owned by a soldier of the Hyksos pharaoh Apepi, because you have the cartouches of Apepi on this. Apepi was the final, most likely the final Hyksos king of the dynasty and the one who was mainly fighting against the Thebans. And so we have this beautiful, beautiful image. Electrum is very interesting, yes. If I'm remembering correctly, it is a mixture of gold and silver. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that one. It's very interesting. Egyptians had it. They used it very often. Silver was more rare than gold. Yeah, okay. Electrum is a mixture. I don't know what the percentages are, but it is a mixture of gold and silver. Silver was more rare in ancient Egypt than gold was. Like, you can see, gold was like kind of plentiful, especially by like the 18th dynasty. Silver was more rare and more valuable because you couldn't get it as, like, there weren't as many mines, silver mines around. Gold mines there were plenty of. Yeah, I think it is. I think it does have other stuff in it, but gold and silver are the two main things. So surprisingly, this was found in a burial in Saqqara, so just south of Cairo. And on both sides, you see that there are Egyptian hieroglyphs being used here, and has the cartouche of the names of the pharaohs. This has the full royal titulary. It actually says here, son of Ra, and has the name. And then may he live. May he live. And so, like, all of this is very standard Egyptian, which you can assume that, that's interesting that they're going to write everything in ancient Egyptian. They're going to follow the royal titulary just like an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. And so it's a very kind of interesting thought that, okay, wait, are these guys... This, if you looked at this, you would think, oh, this is just an Egyptian pharaoh. There's pretty much nothing on here to indicate that these people are foreign at all. Pretty much. The image on the other side is you have a hunt. Yes, Tapir, absolutely. Ask questions. I'm actually just going to cover that. So he is holding two things. He's actually throwing a, wait, I have that in my notes. A short bow and a sword. And you can see he has his, like, sword sheath at his hip. But this is probably a bow. That's what the caption said to it. It also might be a boomerang, because boomerangs were used in ancient Egypt, not like the full Australian boomerang, but there was something that was called a throw stick, and it was essentially a boomerang. So that also might be what this is. But he is hunting all of these different animals up here in the front. And the other thing is, you look at this and you're like, okay, doesn't really have the proportions, doesn't really have a good scale. The shape, the shape of him is very odd. But he's wearing an Egyptian kilt. I'm not 100% sure if he's supposed to be shirtless. You can see very, very faintly there are these two little bands, which could just be not armlets, whatever they are, arm bracelets. It could mean a shirt, but to me, I think he is shirtless with an Egyptian kilt, which is how you would dress as an Egyptian man. So there are very little indications here. If you did not know anything about the Hyksos, you would look at this and you would say, yeah, this is an Egyptian. It's kind of weird. It might be from an intermediate period, but this is Egyptian. So this shows that there is enough of this integration of culture that languages and crafts and styles are all being put together again. Yeah. He has this very, I'm hesitant to say it's a helmet, or if it is a skull cap, or if it is meant to be like all of these dots are meant to indicate like curls or something. But yeah, because the dots here and the dots on his chest are kind of just throwing me off. It's obviously very small. If it's only a dagger handle, it's probably only about this big. But yes, he's got a very round head. Very much so. It was found in Saqqara. The reason we associate that it is a Hyksos person is because both of these cartouches, so this big circle with the hieroglyphs inside of it, a cartouche indicates an ancient Egyptian king's name, and the names inside of here are Hyksos kings, not Egyptian kings. So it's like, if you can't read the hieroglyphs, you just assume this is all Egyptian. But when you look at the names and you realize this is King Apepi, that is an ancient Egyptian or an ancient Hyksos king name, not an Egyptian name. Although technically, yes, is Apepi and Apophis, are those both Egyptian words? Yes. But we know from other examples that this is a Hyksos king and not an Egyptian king. I do believe there was King Apepi, but I don't think it's the right time period. I can't remember. I feel like I've heard that there was another King Apepi, but I'm blanking on it. Maybe he is hairy. Maybe that's what that's supposed to indicate. Who knows? Okay. Any other questions? Taking a water break. So the objects are the opposite sides of it. It's one dagger handle, and it's the back and forth, and then it's just a zoomed in photo of the person. So it's the same piece, just back to back. Yeah, so yes, yeah, Silver. They definitely did it. Oh my goodness. Well, we're getting a follow, and then we're getting a raid. Hello, Not Cromwell. Thank you for the follow. And Ludo, thank you for the raid. It's coming. The sound is coming. There we go. King of the South and North, Son of Ray. Welcome on in, everybody. How's everybody doing? What were you doing today, Ludo? We were just chatting. What were you chatting about? Gotta wait for the trumpet to end. But welcome on in, everybody. I hope everybody had a great stream over at Ludo. My name is MelissainDeNile. I'm in denial in more ways than one. I'm an Egyptologist, archaeologist, and I stream Egyptology, archaeology, and history games here on Twitch. And then we also talk about ancient Egyptian history. So this is part of our Beyond the Nile guest lecture series. From March to October, I get one guest to give a lecture, which Ludo was our guest last month? Yes, last month. And I was supposed to give this lecture last month as my lecture for the month, and the end of May became horrible. So now it's the first week of June, and we're giving it for our June lecture. Ooh, the Middle Ages and modern games. Whoa, very cool, Ludo. That seems awesome. That is really, really cool. So today we are talking about the ancient Egyptian, or the ancient Hyksos people, which were a people that were very misunderstood throughout ancient Egyptian and modern history. They were thought to be invaders for a very long time, and we haven't gotten yet to talking about the historiography. We're just looking at the imagery, so we'll get to the historiography very, very soon. But we're talking about these people and trying to figure out maybe who they are and how they have been interpreted over 3,000 years. So welcome on in. Anything else I wanted to say? No, I think we're good. So, we were just looking at this image, which is a dagger head that probably was owned by a soldier of one of the last Hyksos kings called Apepi or Apophis, but this was later found in a tomb in Saqqara, possibly indicated that it had been looted or had been was part of like a, what's it called, a Theban soldier's bounty when they invaded the Hyksos people. So, what other imagery do we have of ancient Hyksos people? We got this. This looks like it's a bad drawing. It's a drawing of what the back of a scarab looks like. It's a pretty bad drawing, but that's okay. We do have a lot of scarabs from ancient Hyksos kings that have been preserved. Some of them just have the cartouche, some of them have some sort of decorative element, and I wanted to pull this one up in specific because specifically because it has this image of an actual person on it. This one was found in Avaris, and it has the depiction of a pharaoh as either a Near Eastern weather god Baal or the Near Eastern weather god Baal as a pharaoh, vice versa. No matter what, essentially we have this imagery that is presenting a Hyksos ruler as a divine ruler, similar to how the pharaohs themselves depicted themselves. And obviously we have it on a scarab, which is a widely used object, and with sometimes imagery, sometimes text, or at least the name of the pharaoh. So this is again something that they are borrowing, copying from the actual ancient Egyptians, and kind of taking as their own. Very good, Tapir. That was the next thing I was gonna say. So this pharaoh is only wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, which is the Delta. So he is this king is only wearing the red crown. He is not wearing the combined crown, saying that they are ruling over both parts of Egypt, which shows that whoever created this piece, whether or not this is actually being created by, like, commissioned by the Hyksos rulers, whether or not Egyptians are, hi Max, welcome on in. Whether or not, like, Egyptians are creating this, or they are being commissioned by Hyksos artisans, or some sort of combination of the two, there is the understanding that they are only, quote unquote, allowed to have a red crown, because they are only ruling the northern part, which is Lower Egypt in the Delta. And it's just so interesting that they kind of understand how Egyptian rulership works. Because you would assume, hey, these people came in and they're just like changing everything up. They're going to take their own traditions, but they understand enough to kind of know like what to do. But they're also combining it with their own god, Baal. The last type of imagery we're going to mention is essentially, instead of creating their own art, the Hyksos people reused a lot of pieces of ancient Egyptian art that they found before. The most famous versions of these are these sphinxes, otherwise known as the Hyksos sphinxes. This is a group of royal sphinxes that were created by the previous pharaoh Amenemhet III of the 12th dynasty, and then they were reinscribed with the names of several Hyksos kings. Many of these pieces were found in Tanis, which is a large city that was in the Middle Kingdom, and these pieces were then later transported to their capital, Avaris, to adorn their palace. 7 of these sphinxes are known, and then there are other statues of the same ancient Egyptian pharaohs found in Tanis that are also associated with the Hyksos kings due to reinscription. And you can see this example of like the bottom half of a statue of Amenemhet III that has been reinscribed for the god, for the king Khayan. What I'm hearing is that us nerds here are... Yeah, no, absolutely. It's also, I hate to say it, this is just them being lazy. This is them like, I don't want to create our own court art. We just found these cool statues. Let's just reinscribe them and say they're ours. Yes, Tanis. That is how Tanis is spelled. Tanis is like, it's not this mythical place. We sort of know where Tanis is now, but Tanis is like the place that they talk about in the first Indiana Jones movie. It was a really big capital for a short amount of time. Yeah, it's got a map room with a giant like gold thing with a gem in the middle that will create a full map and tell you where the Ark of the Covenant is. Absolutely. Let me look at these for a second. Go back. Specifically, when I use the word reinscribe, I will be only talking about text, but now that I'm looking at these, I do believe they just changed the text. Amenemhet III has a very distinct face, and that is that face. These are also very interesting sphinxes because they show them as like full lions. Like when you look at like the Sphinx of Giza and you look at like other sphinxes, they don't have this like crazy long mane that they do. But yeah, I'm 99% sure they did not actually reinscribe the faces. They just reinscribed the names. Similar to what Ramses II did on everything. Although I think he might have done some photoshopping on his faces. But yeah, Amenemhet III has a pretty distinct face. There are some kings in the Middle Kingdom that have very distinct... What was that guy's name? Is that Sesostris? Oh, Sesostris, the sad man with the big ears. I love Sesostris. He's pretty cool. But yeah, so most of this is probably... They're just straight up... You just scrape off the edge and you just reinscribe it with something else. I think this is one of the pieces found in maybe Tanis or in Avaris. I'm not 100% sure where this photo is originally from. Let's see, what else? Okay, we also have this little statue of a lion with the name of King Kion. As you say, we're going to talk about the King Kion a lot. But instead of being found in Egypt, this little lion statue was found in Baghdad. It is unclear if this was originally an Egyptian piece and it was reinscribed to have his name, or if this is like a full statue. I have feelings that it actually is like an original Hyksos statue, just because full lions are not really depicted until kind of later in ancient Egyptian art, and not really ever in style. So I think this might be potentially a full Hyksos item, but it shows that they had relationships with Babylon and other Mesopotamian cultures at that time. All of this information leads us to believe that these pharaohs most likely did not produce any court art. This might seem typical because the ancient Egyptian royal life was all about like showing off your prowess and wealth like via art, but these people are not Egyptian. They may have had different court practices, and they obviously were very keen to assimilate, to borrow, to copy, but they kind of just wanted to do their own thing. And there's going to be an ad in a second, but I'm going to show you briefly this as I open a new bag of corn nuts. I'm gonna wait for the ad. I'm gonna be very good about waiting for ads this time, I swear. Ooh. God, I have to take out the trash so bad. Thank you. I'm waiting for it to tell me that there's an ad. It said there was gonna be an ad. Duck or goose? Yeah. It said there was gonna be an ad, and now it's lying to me. It says it's going on my end, but coughing. Coughing. I need to chug. Ugh. It says Museum Nerd. This is from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I got this really cool holographic sticker of different alcoholic drinks from someone. I also found this really cute plant one. And then I also have the sticker that has a spell. Death shall come on swift wings to him who that toucheth the tomb of the pharaoh. We sell museum nerd stuff at my museum, so I bought this at my museum. But there's a ton of, like, you can also find theater nerd stuff, but the museum nerd, they have pins. I have a pin that's on my lanyard. They have notebooks. Yeah, my cup curse. Okay. Oh, okay. Ugh. Okay. Sorry. Chugged the water a little too fast. Okay, so this is the last of the kind of like depictions, because this is a more, it's not obviously a depiction, but I wanted to point this out because this is a type of pottery that is closely associated with the Hyksos people. It's called Tel El Yahude ware. It's a very dark colored ware, very stylized, has lots of little like inscription or decorations and geometric patterns and such. Neither of these pieces were found in Avaris, but it is very similar to Levantine pottery and from the same time period, and that there's a possibility that it either was imported into Avaris or it was made in Avaris and then exported other places in Egypt and other places in the Near East. So Tel El, this one is like the hardest one to say. Tel El, no, I should just copy it. I should not try to type this because I'm gonna get it wrong. Tel El Yahude. That's this type of pottery. All right, now let's get into the good stuff. I kept moving that imagery section around back and forth because I just like could not figure out where to put it, so we did it first. So, how have the Hyksos been interpreted in the past? Let's look at some previous scholarship that has talked about the Hyksos for like literally like 3,000 years. And I want to go into like how they are typically talked about now, and then a little bit of history about like what we know about the people who were ruling in the Delta at the time. I really wanted this to be a very good historiography section. It's not going to be. We're just going to say that very, very right out. If I had like more time to do the research, I feel like I could have found somebody already created a historiography, but I got a good amount of stuff, but I feel like I wanted to find early like 1800s and 1900s like scholarship and quotes about the Hyksos people, and I just didn't have time to do that. There's still enough information, but it's going to be a little bit general. I really wanted more quotes and such, but we didn't get to that. So, one of the first people to write about the Hyksos people is going to be the Greco-Egyptian priest and historian Manetho. He recorded in his book Egyptiaca a history of Egypt, which was probably commissioned by one of the Ptolemaic pharaohs that he essentially was living under. But if you know anything about his histories, the only reason that we still have excerpts of his histories is because they have been quoted by later historians. We do not have a single section of his preserved that we know is actually from him. We only have it as quotations from later scholars. One of them is Josephus, who is a Jewish historian, and we're going to talk about him next. We already talked about him before, but we're going to talk about him more next. So, in Manetho's writings, he uses the term Hyksos ethnically to designate people of probable Western Semitic or Levantine origin. But he also portrays them as invaders and oppressors in Egypt specifically. And there's a translation of the section that I'll read right now. A people of ignoble origin from the east, whose coming was unforeseen, had the audacity to invade the country, which they mastered by main force without difficulty or even battle. Having overpowered the chiefs, they then savagely burnt the cities, razed the temples of the gods to the ground, and treated the whole native population with the utmost cruelty, massacring some and carrying off the wives and children of the others into slavery. Whoa boy. Okay. Crazy description of these people. As always, you have to take these ancient historians' words with a grain of salt, because even though Manetho lived in the 3rd century BCE, he's talking about events that are like 1300 years before he was alive. It's hard to say that everything that he says is possible, because it's also unclear as to where he is getting his information. He's obviously not getting it from word of mouth, because it's so long ago, so he might be getting it from other writings. It's entirely possible. But then you have to think about, wait a second, if he's getting it from other writings, who was writing those writings? And why were those people recording that information? Because obviously, we've all heard the phrase that we mentioned earlier, history is written by the winners. So if all of this information is being passed down by Egyptian royalty, who were the ones to take down the Hyksos people, they might describe them as invaders. And they might not be the most accurate people to be learning this history from. So everything got to go in a little bit of context. And Baha, that was the best. I can't believe there's a salt emoji emote. I love that. So yes. So while I will slightly trust Manetho over Herodotus, slightly, I will trust Manetho about Ptolemaic Egypt more than Herodotus. I will not trust either of them about anything that is at least a thousand years, at least 500 years before them. So it's definitely a little difficult to kind of take anything that they say truthfully. So then in addition, we have Josephus, who, while interpreting Manetho's original writings, connects the Hyksos people with the Jews, but he also calls them Arabs. I never trust Herodotus. I think it's so funny that like somebody really got like mad at me once for like saying that I don't like Herodotus, and I was like, are you a classicist or are you an Egyptologist? Because Egyptologists hate Herodotus. Classicists are okay with Herodotus, which makes sense. You can be happy with Herodotus if you are only talking about his writings of what is currently going on in his society. You can't not, like, everything that he says about Egypt, you cannot take with any sort of, unless you are only referencing what Roman Egypt is like. And the same thing goes with Manetho. I would trust Manetho about what he says is going on in Ptolemaic Egypt. I do not trust him any time before that. Granted, again, like, we do have theories that Manetho and maybe Herodotus had access to like actual written records, like at the Library of Alexandria or something like that. But we just don't know those things specifically, and we don't know how ancient Egyptians were recording a lot of this information. So we don't know. It's all we don't know. This is just like I said before. It's not the more we know, it's that we don't know anything. That's the rainbow that's going across the screen right now. We don't know anything. I hate to say it, which sucks, but it is true. I found this great chart, which helps us all determine what's actually going on with Manetho's Egyptiaca. So you have the Egyptiaca from the 3rd century BCE. Then you have the Egyptiaca altered by pro- and anti-Jewish editors and chronographers. Then you have Josephus's excerpts in the 1st century CE. You have an epitome of dynasties, rulers, lengths, and of reigns, and some details recorded. And then you have even more historians even later. So we have Sextus Julius Africanus, we have Syncellus, From the 9th century, we have Eusebius, preserved by Jerome, an Armenian translation. More signs. I can't say that guy's name. And then the incomplete or contaminated versions, the Pseudo-Manetho Book of Sothis, Eratosthenes, and the Baden Papyrus. So this is all how these histories have been chopped up and how they are being... Yeah, Baha. And the thing is, I hate to say it, we can't even say that is for certain. It's that we're like, when you can't see the original source, how do we know if they have twisted it, or how do we know if they have been truthful? It's like impossible to know. It's like, it's so maddening. And it's so maddening that so many early scholars, like in the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s, like, took all of this shit as gospel. And, like, didn't think about the consequences of just saying, oh, well, this guy's from the 1st century CE, like, he must be saying the truth. Duh. Like, come on, people. Come on. So, what we have from Josephus is that, yeah, who twisted this stuff? Who knows? This goes along with, like, how the Bible has been translated. This goes along with so many different things that just, like, where did it come from? Where is all this information coming from? How is it being passed down? And then we just, unfortunately, you get to a point where you get stuck and we don't have any preserved records of these things. So you're like, great, cool. I guess this is where we're at right now. Where did it come from? Where did it go? Where are Cotton Eye Joe's birth certificate? Cotton Eye Joe might be the answer. He might be the answer, guys. Who the fuck knows? It's a maddening thing being a historian, isn't it? It's just like, sometimes it's so fucking annoying that we'll never know. All right. So, we have Josephus. He is sort of creating these excerpts of Manetho's pieces, of like quotations of Manetho in this piece, but then he's also adding to it as well. So, Josephus states when the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt, they founded Jerusalem. And stick with me here, because this is where it goes crazy. The problem is we don't know if that statement is originally from Manetho or if it is a statement of Josephus. It is unclear. And so my money's on Josephus because he is like a Jewish scholar, i.e. sort of a Old Testament biblical scholar at that time, trying to make connections to things that are in like the Old Testament and such. Because then Josephus goes on to tell this story, which I do believe is originally in Manetho, but again, we don't know how much of this. Oh, get ready, Silver. Get ready, Silver. This is what we were talking about earlier. Get ready. In this excerpt, he tells this story about a renegade Egyptian prince named Osarseph, who leads an army of lepers against a pharaoh named Amenophis. And Amenophis is sort of the Greek equivalent of Amenhotep. Amenophis. This pharaoh was the son of Ramses and the father of another Ramses, whose original name was Sethos or Seti. Is everybody picking up what I'm putting down here? We're almost there. The pharaoh, essentially this renegade group of lepers, which I don't know why they're lepers in this situation. This renegade group of lepers drives the pharaoh out of Egypt, and get ready. No, not yet, Cassidy. We're almost there. Not aliens, but they drive the pharaoh out of Egypt, and this leper army, in alliance with the Hyksos people, ravage Egypt before eventually this pharaoh Amenophis comes back and then expels both the lepers and the Hyksos people. And then, towards the end of this story, Osar-Seth changes his name to Moses. So, this fucking baffled me when I read this morning, and I was so confused. And surprisingly, there's little evidence for this story. But I feel like everyone can sort of, I think you guys we're all kind of smart enough. Yes, this is from Josephus. Although potentially this story is from Manetho, and then Josephus is repeating this information, obviously, because we don't have the original Manetho, but some of this might also be added to by Josephus, but is completely and utterly unclear. So, I think you guys can sort of see... No, Silver. So think about this just a little bit. I feel like you guys can see certain themes that are getting pulled from either biblical sources or other portions of ancient Egyptian history. And Jan Osman, R.I.P., one of the best Egyptologists ever, he actually argues that this is a mixture of experiences of the later Amarna period, with Osar-Seth standing in for Akhenaten, which was a crazy one for me, because in my opinion, this is very much like more the Moses or Joseph story from the Bible. Obviously, they put in Moses' name at the very, very end of it, but that is what one of these Egyptologists think, that this is like kind of a mixture of like the story of Akhenaten and him being this rebel, and like, but it doesn't make any sense in context with the Hyksos, time-wise or anything otherwise. And so I will reference the addition of the name change from Osar-Seth to Moses might have been a Josephus addition. But this also stems because I don't think we talked about it a lot when we did the Amarna period like discussion series, but Akhenaten is very frequently referenced as Moses. And I don't understand why, but there are a lot of biblical archaeologists that associate Akhenaten with Moses. And I think I understand that it is kind of, it's going along with the story that Akhenaten is the first monotheistic, that he's the first monotheist, which you see that title being thrown around all the time, that he is the first monotheist, when that's not what happened at all. But he has been associated with Moses a lot, in that, like, he is that kind of rebel and stuff. That Akhenaten was Moses. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is a very strong biblical archaeology theory, that he was the same person. Even though other biblical archaeologists date the story of Moses to later in the New Kingdom. Later, like if you think of Prince of Egypt is Ramses and Seti. So it would be Ramses the first, or no, sorry, Seti being the dad and Ramses the second is the son. But in the Bible, there are no names. So just Prince of Egypt is not historically accurate in that way. The Bible doesn't use any names for the pharaohs. So it's completely unclear as to who any of the pharaohs are. And that even includes back in the Joseph story as well. Okay. Where the heck are we? So after, as you can see by all these other names kind of in this third tier of information, is that more historians like Sextus Julius Africanus and Eusebius, I can't say his name either, say that the Hyksos may have come from Phoenicia, and there were lots and lots of arguments as to where these people came from, pretty much. Alleged mistranslated, giving us the Red Sea instead of the Reed Sea, in which referred to a particular era of the Nile that was crossable on foot. Ooh, very weird. So is the usual time period of Akhenaten contested by centuries? No. Well, in the biblical archaeology, yes. If biblical archaeology is not something that I know a lot about, although I know a lot about the original Bible stories and how they associated with Egypt. But for yes, that there are obviously some biblical archaeologists who do believe that Akhenaten is Moses, which would it would contradict other biblical archaeologists and obviously real archaeologists about time periods of like when Akhenaten was living and when Ramses was living and all that stuff. I've never heard that one, the Red Sea versus the Reed Sea. That's very interesting. Also, I think that's extremely funny because that is exactly the first 20 minutes of the show, of like my favorite movie of all time, Atlantis, where they were talking about where the tablet was, if it was in Ireland versus Iceland, which is so funny. That's so funny. I've never seen that documentary. If anybody knows what it's called or where it is, I might just do some, I don't want to watch it, but I might do some Googling because I'm interested. Reed Sea. It's interesting. I mean, I will say it is very confusing because the Egyptians don't really have a word for sea, for ocean. They just have the Wajware. And my professor was very distinct when we were talking about the Wajware, and that it is technically translated as the Great Green. A lot of people translate it as the ocean or the sea, but my linguistics professor was very distinct with us in saying that, like, we don't know what the Wajware is. We don't know if the Wajware is describing the Nile, or is describing the Mediterranean, or is describing the Red Sea. And so when he didn't want us, like, we weren't really speculating, we weren't really going into it. He just wanted to make sure that, like, when we were translating this word, he did not want us to translate it as sea or ocean. He wanted us to translate it as the Great Green. And so that's very interesting because we don't know what the Great Green is. We don't know sort of what it's a body of water, but we don't really know if they're meaning the Mediterranean, the Nile, or the Red Sea. I think it's between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, but it is unclear. Yeah, very much so. All right. So, being classified as invaders by Manetho and Josephus and all of these people made the stories of the battles between the 17th dynasty and the Hyksos people more believable. Manetho's conclusion about the battle states that the Hyksos were expelled out of Egypt after their defeat, and here is the quote from Manetho. Tutmosis invested the walls of Avaris with an army of 480,000 men, and endeavored to reduce the Hyksos to submission by siege. Despairing of achieving his object, he concluded a treaty under which the Hyksos were all to evacuate Egypt and go whither they would unmolested. Upon these terms, no fewer than 240,000 entire households with their possessions left Egypt and traversed the desert to Syria. And this is kind of their quote and such. So, I have another picture? Yeah. So with all of these theories and this text were continuously spread throughout scholarship in the 1800s and 1900s. Yeah, that's a lot of fucking people. I find that numbers are just literally like a worst nightmare to any ancient historian. Like even the ancient Egyptians, how many people do they say died in Kadesh or like all that stuff? Like, it's just like, I feel like it's just a numbers game, and it's usually just that they don't give a shit. All of these things kind of melted down to that the ancient Hyksos people were invaders. They came into Egypt and they invaded, and they settled by force into the Nile Delta. And there are some theories that included that the names of the Hyksos kings might have been Hurrian, which is a group that lived in northern Syria and eastern Anatolia. There was also a theory that they were Indo-Europeans, because what else do European armchair archaeologists have to say about a group of people from not Europe? Is that they were Indo-Europeans. Whatever. There was also theories that they were a group called the Marianu, which is a caste of chariot-mounted hereditary warrior nobility that existed all over the Near East. And this is most likely a reference to the chariots that the Hyksos were thought to have brought to Egypt. All of these theories have since been discredited, though honestly, anything is fucking possible. We're going to be very honest here. We don't know very much about their origins, and we also don't know as much about the intermixing of cultures in the Near East at this time. We just don't. So getting down to like a very specific origin point, I think is quite literally impossible. But we can very generally say that we think that they're from the Near East. That is the closest that we're going to pretty much get. There was also a theory that the Hyksos people had this vast empire because the Hyksos goods have been found in places like Baghdad and in Crete. And so there was this thought that they actually had a crazy large empire rather than them actually just trading with other people. Bird arrows. That is such a good question. Did Josephus say they worship Set, or is that from other sources? I am not as familiar with the rest of Josephus's text, but I do know that I'm going to say that is from other sources. Oh my god, I really wish what's her name was here. Amber was here. So Amber is a Kemetic priestess who worships Set, and she gave an amazing lecture that is over on my YouTube if you want to watch it, all about the god Set and how he was worshipped. I am going to say that that comes from another source, because we do believe that they worshipped Set in the area of the Delta before the Hyksos people. Mainly because, sort of doing a weird backtracking, when the Ramesside capital of Pi Ramesses was in the Delta, very, very close to Avaris, there is a huge stela of one of the Ramesside kings. I'm blanking. It's probably the Ramesses II, but honestly, could be any of them. That celebrates 400 years. Actually, it might be Seti. That might be the person. It might be made by Seti. I can't remember who makes it. But it celebrates 400 years of Set worship in the Delta. So I am going to assume that that was not put in Josephus's text. Yeah, I'm gonna say I can assume that. Yeah, Matt, what's your question? I'll take a drink of water as I take an off-topic question. We're about to transition to another section of this lecture in just a second. Actually, I'm gonna answer your question in just a second. This is the last of this section. So there was this theory that Hyksos had a large empire. That's probably not really true. And these theories, that this invaders theory was always the most prominent theory about the Hyksos, pretty much up until the 1960s and 1970s, which is when the first serious excavations at Avaris really opened the can of worms as to who the Hyksos were, and then the misinterpretations of these people that has been happening for thousands of years. So the next part we're going to talk about Tel El Daba, or Avaris, and what was discovered there, and then we will go into how do we actually interpret the Hyksos people now. Okay. Oh god. Random question time. Ask me random questions that have nothing to say. I remember Amber saying something about how Set is the god of outsiders and foreigners, which is part. Yes. I do remember that, and I do think that Set was worshipped in the Delta before the Hyksos got there. And I know, and we'll talk about Set a little bit, but Set is also associated with the god Baal because they're both weather gods. And so that is another reason why the Hyksos really liked him and worshipped him as well. So Matt asked, how did hunting work if it was a sacred animal? Was it different process or were they not hunted? Egyptians didn't really have a sacred animal. We're going to say this just specifically with Egyptians. Egyptians didn't really have a sacred animal. Like I know all animals were sacred, but not in the same sense of like Hinduism and cows, sort of. Different time periods had different sacred animals, but more often than not, it was like, this is gonna sound weird, it was one animal. So like the Apis bull. The Apis bull was a bred bull that was kept in like one, so the Apis bull was like a bull that they bred, and every year there was one bull, and he sat in a very fancy pen, and then they killed him every year. So it's not that they were like out in the wild and such. So it's, and another thing about hunting in ancient Egypt, it is actually predicted that hunting was one of the lowest ways of food procurement in ancient Egypt, even though it is depicted a lot in ancient Egyptian like tombs and temples. Hunting was, I think, more of a sport than actually meant to be a way to get food. And it was a sport for only the very, very, very elite. Same thing kind of, maybe not with fishing in certain areas, but like it is, yeah, it looks cool to paint. And it also shows that you are, one of the big things with ancient Egyptians is that they understood that there is order and there is chaos, and order and chaos both have to exist for life to exist. And so one of the ways that they kind of portrayed this battle between order and chaos is that order was the ancient Egyptian world, and everything outside of that ancient Egyptian world was chaos. So all of your enemies, all of these other nations, and the animal world. The animal world was included in that chaos. And so by depicting yourself hunting and depicting a pharaoh hunting, you are taking order over that chaos and you are creating that balance. And so it was obviously done. One of the big things is that people, like a lot of pharaohs bragged about the lion hunt. Lions didn't exist for that vast majority of time that ancient Egyptian pharaohs were around. They were not really in Egypt. They had sort of migrated more south. But defeating a lion, that is that order over chaos. Killing a hippo is defeating the god Set, or is defeating like this huge, like very dangerous animal and creating that order and stuff. And so, yeah, so food hunting and sport hunting are different, but there are estimates of like less than 10% of food procurement was done by hunting during certain time periods of ancient Egypt. Definitely, like, kind of the older you go, the more hunting was important, but the later you go, hunting was less important for food procurement because they had domesticated animals, and even like the lowest of low populations, they weren't eating meat. They were only eating bread and beer. That's all we got. But very good question, Matt. So yeah, so there weren't really any super sacred animals that you couldn't necessarily hunt. Because like even you could say hippos and crocodiles and bulls, they were sacred at certain time periods, but you'd still hunt them if you wanted. I mean, they still killed crocodiles to mummify them as sacrifices. And same thing with cats, and same thing with ibises, and same thing with literally everything. So it's the same thing. Yeah. But very, very good question, Matt. All right. Now into the very, very cool part. And we'll watch a video in a second as well. So, let's talk about Avaris, or Tel El Daba. If you've never heard the phrases Tel El, a tell is a hill. And it is commonly given to archaeological sites, especially if you don't know the name of the city or settlement that was on that archaeological site. And so a tell is like a hill or an area. And so this area is called Tel El Daba. And technically you can sort of see on this map, Tel El Daba is this hill specifically, but then the whole area, I believe Tel is Arabic. Someone might have to correct me, but I do believe it is Arabic. I find that phrasing started more with archaeologists in the Near East. So like looking at literally old ziggurats that were these giant hills. But then it starts to get used in Egypt as well. Yeah, better to dig a hill than a midden. Absolutely. But yes, I do believe Tel would be Arabic. Because you don't use that, you don't find that term truly outside of the Near East or Egypt. I don't think. I haven't seen any examples of it not in like Mesopotamia. Tel Aviv. I'm 99% sure that's the same thing, Matt. That Tel Aviv, Tel is a hill. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I think that is probably the exact same language. I'm not 100% sure, but it could be very much. Because usually it is Tel with one L. You do see it with two L's sometimes, but I think sometimes it's Tel with one L. Oh yeah, Maddie said Tel Aviv as well. Yeah, so that's what you see, Roxy. So Eridu is the name of the actual like city or something, but the archaeological site is Tel Abu Sharain. So, yeah, exactly. So lots of, I don't think it comes out anywhere else from like the Middle East or Egypt. I haven't seen anyone, like it's not used in Europe. I'll say that. No, I don't think any European site is called a tell. So Avaris was the capital city of the Hyksos people, and it's located at Tel El Daba in the eastern northern delta. So you're going to look at this map and you're going to look all the way over here and you see Avaris. You can see it is very close to Tanis, and is kind of on this most east. It's called the Pelusium branch of the Nile Delta. And the first excavations in this area were conducted in 1885 by the Swiss Egyptologist Edward Naville. They were followed by excavations in 1928 by Mahmoud Hamza, who proposed that this site was the site of the Ramesside capital, Pi-Ramesses. The first person to propose that it was actually Avaris was the Egyptian Egyptologist Labib Habashi. Habashi, I'm not sure. When he excavated in 1941 and 1942. And then there were also excavations of a 12th dynasty site, so an earlier site by Shihada Adam from 1951. I don't know why. Yeah, it's not Hibachi. It's I wrote it as Hibachi first, but it's Habachi. I don't know how to speak Arabic. It's all the letters are different. So yeah, so there was also a 12th dynasty site on this in this location that was excavated by Shihada Adam from 1951 to 1954. I also want crab ragoons. But it wasn't really systematically excavated until 1966. When it was excavated by the Austrian Archaeological Institute, mainly by this guy in the corner, Manfred Beitak, and Irene Forstner-Müller. They excavated this site in 1966, 1969, and have been consistently working at the site since 1975, which is a very, 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 very long time in comparison to archaeological sites being consistently excavated and investigated. So this site covers an area about 2 square kilometers on what is called turtlebacks, essentially areas of land that stay above ground during the Nile floods. Oop, there's an ad. I'm stopping. This is just my snack break. Can I get water? Okay. I'm getting better. It's only a giant block of ice. I gotta get some water. Next time. So the area covers about 2 square kilometers on these turtle backs or areas of land that stay above ground during the Nile floods. And if you have heard me talk about archaeology in the Nile Delta, it is not remotely close to how excavations are done along the Nile River, and the environment is completely and utterly different. The Delta is an extremely wet environment, which is not good for the preservation of organic material like wood, paintings, clothing, human remains, anything. Mummies, anything. It is really, really bad. And I know we've already talked about, like, when I talk about organic material and how it is preserved, I usually say it's either in a very, very wet environment or a very, very dry environment. Unfortunately, it is a very, very wet and cold environment, which this place is not. And then it is a very hot and dry environment. Those are the 2 best types of preservation. And unfortunately, this is a very, very wet and warm environment. Very warm and humid. For the most, boats were made out of reeds or made out of wood. But yes, a lot of boats were made out of reeds, and then we have those. I don't even think we have a single reed boat that is preserved unless it's a small, like, model one. I think we have maybe like 1 or 2 model ones, but the boats that we have preserved are all wood, because they're the big boys. Okay. So, especially in this case, the Nile Delta is also completely, pretty much nowadays, covered in modern agriculture, which has churned up all of the different stratigraphic layers over time, making it very difficult to kind of see. All of these, like, black and white images, these are all, like, scans, and then you can see some of the building layouts, and I have some better photos of what this area looks like. And then there's also a reconstruction video we're going to watch, and we'll hop around on a website that has this image that they use. So the earliest construction on this site was actually way back in the first intermediate period, and it was most likely a kind of defense system, maybe a small fortress, which would protect the eastern border of the ancient Egyptian country, because this is sort of on the lines of what is called the Horus Road, which was a road that kind of went from the Delta straight across the Sinai Peninsula to the Near East. And there were lots of little mini settlements and fortresses and sometimes mining towns and stuff along the way to be stopover points. We're kind of, again, in the desert. But the first major settlement on this site was founded by Pharaoh Amenemhet, I hate this guy's name, Amenemhet I in the Middle Kingdom. Again, was used as a stop-off point for traders to go to the Near East. The site was called Hut Weret, and it was a small Egyptian town around 1830 BCE. In and around 1800 BCE, there was a larger trade colony that was still under Egyptian control. And we have scarabs with the name retinue, which you remember means Asiatics, Levantines, Northern Syria, can be anywhere from those kind of range of names, that have been found in Avaris, but dating to the 12th dynasty. which is when Amenemhet I is Middle Kingdom, is 12th dynasty. And so this very interesting, like considering our conversations about the names of the Hyksos people and how they have been reused and reinterpreted in a lot of different ways. The archaeological investigations on this site point out a lot of different structures. And one of them includes, it's very small, but it's right here in the center, a temple to the god Set that was built around 1780 BCE. Most likely, these East Asian or Asiatic immigrants of this area considered the ancient Egyptian god Set to be their god Hadad or Baal. There are two kind of options here, because there are gods of weather. And so it appears that this might have been a dual temple for both a Levantine and a Egyptian god. And then later, around 1700 BCE, we do have a temple district to the Canaanite goddess Asherah and the Egyptian goddess Hathor, and that was built in the eastern part of the city. I think that is up here, which you can sort of see. This says temple. It doesn't say specifically what type of temple, but it also could be like on the eastern side of here. I'm not 100% sure which one. Wait, sorry. Sorry. My coworker just sent me a picture of my other coworker, and she's all wrapped up in a blanket, and he says, I found a new mummy. I think it's early kingdom period. And Eye of Horrors Are Us was inscribed on the sarcophagus, probably not cursed. I'm gonna tell him. Wow, you studied. You can what am I gonna say? You can recognize it. Wow, you got that spot on. Good job. That's what I'm gonna say. The early kingdom period. That's my favorite. That's my favorite phrase ever. The early kingdom period. Alright, so we got the temple district to the Canaanite goddess Asherah, and then we... Oh my god. I can't read the next text that just happened, but that's the most amazing thing. Wow. Oh god. That's what I was thinking. I wrote Baal later in the in this text, but then suddenly I was like, wait a second. It says Hadad. But yeah. That's what I was. So yeah. Same god. Perfect. That's just what I needed confirmation of that. I was gonna look that up later. I was like, did I just say that wrong? So we know that around 1650 BCE is when the actual like Hyksos rulers arrive in the city. But there is indication that there are more Asiatics, obviously because we have Canaanite gods and goddesses being built, or temples to these gods being built before we actually have these people who are coming and actually ruling out of this location. And when that happens, the city grows to about 250 hectares. It just like continuously keeps growing. And you can tell that like Tel el-Dabba is where a lot of the original stuff, so this says settlement from the 13th to 15th dynasty. There's a settlement for the 13th, 15th dynasty over here. You have a town center for the 12th dynasty over here. But then when you get to the 15th dynasty, you have palace complex for the 15th dynasty over here. You have a settlement of the 15th dynasty. You have a new kingdom settlement. You have the docks of the 15th dynasty. Town enlargement to the 13th and 15th dynasties. Everything is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it is actually believed that Avaris was the largest city in the world from around 1670 to 1557 BCE. And then there was a large citadel wall built around this area in around 1550 BCE. And you can sort of, I'm assuming that's probably what these are. Although these might be canals. I gotta look at some of the other photos. No, those might be. Oh, here's, what does that say? That's in German. I think this might be the wall. Maybe? Maybe? I don't know. I can't tell. Very good question, Wombat. I did not find that in any of my research. Hospitals are weird. I honestly don't even know if we have any sort of thing that could be considered a hospital in ancient Egypt. I know that later there were places in some ancient Egyptian temples that were possibly like hospitals, but those more date to the Ptolemaic period when you have a lot of Greek influence coming into the country. So I don't know if we really have anything that would be sort of classified as like a hospital, like found. We have a good amount of medical texts, but we don't really have any sort of buildings that are closely associated with that, minus the mummification house, which is its own type of hospital in a way, but not an actual hospital. Okay, so after the defeat of the Hyksos, Avaris was briefly abandoned, though the areas where the Temple of Set was continuously occupied. Thank you so much, Vol, for the follow. Welcome on in. Afterwards, Avaris was superseded by the building of the capital city of Pyramesses, roughly 1.2 miles to the north. So very, very, very close to actual Avaris. And eventually, a certain portion of the city is also absorbed into Pyramesses, and there is a good portion of the Hyksos buildings that do not survive because of this building over of Avaris. At one point during when it was Pyramesses, they decided to use a lot of the former city of Avaris as a cemetery and burial ground. So there are lots of pockets within this that are actually Ramesside burials and not Avaris burials. And then eventually the city becomes kind of fully abandoned and doesn't really seem to ever have been highly occupied ever again, pretty much. I want to briefly talk about some burial practices that were discovered in Avaris and at other nearby sites, because this is one of the biggest indications that the inhabitants were not native Egyptians. Rather than bury their dead in a necropolis kind of outside of the city, the Hyksos chose to bury their dead within their own settlements, sometimes literally under the floors of houses. And while some of these tombs included slightly Egyptian-style chapels, which you can sort of see here on the right, not really a chapel per se, but like this is not a totally uncommon burial practice. When you're not getting like a full tomb, you have sort of a brick-lined pit. Most of these people did not have Egyptian-style burials. They were kind of pit burials. Some of them had some grave goods, mostly like pottery and things that you need, which you will find in any ancient culture. But there was pretty much no indication of mummification in sight. So even though that they are very, very integrated into the Egyptian lifestyle, they are copying Egyptian art, they are copying Egyptian royal titulary, they are not mummifying. And granted, I'll point out, obviously mummification is not very well preserved in a very wet environment like the Nile Delta, but you would have some indications of mummification even if it is not perfectly preserved. And there just does not seem to be enough evidence of it. There is also some indication of a possibly human sacrifices being placed in the front doorways of these tombs. I couldn't find a picture of any of them, but although actually this actually could be it now that I'm thinking about it, because there are two skulls right here. If you can see this in the upper left. Many of these were young females that were buried in sort of the doorway of the tomb chamber. And then you also have interred infants in amphora, so in Canaanite style pottery jars, which there are some pot burials that have been found in ancient Egypt, but they are mostly much older, pre-dynastic, much older. In addition, we do have some very elite items appearing in these burials. This is probably like the most famous piece. This is a gold diadem that is located at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was found in the burial of an elite woman out of Varus, and has these images of this like stag in the middle, and these gazelles, and these either stars or rosettes. Rosettes, I think, are more likely, and they are actually a very common Near Eastern motif that you find in a lot of stuff. And it's like, this is like pure gold. This is like really great quality, beautiful craftsmanship, beautiful piece. Definitely showing the elite nature of some of these people who were living in the Hyksos period. Another different practice, which you may have seen on that other image on the first slide, is that it could... lotus flowers, at least in Egyptian motifs, are not depicted in that shape. Weirdly, lotus flowers are depicted like triangles with lots of things. They're not really depicted in that 3D way most of the time. It's kind of odd. They're kind of portrayed very 2D. But so another practice is that you would include a horse or a donkey in your burial with your human burials, or they would have sort of sacrificial, like ritualized burials of horses or donkeys. This may have been a way to associate with the god Set, which we know that the Hyksos people were very fond of, but it also could have been meant to represent status, and that is a much more Near Eastern notion, is to bury a horse or a donkey. So here's the thing, Baha. Horses most likely did not exist in Egypt before the Hyksos people. There is one theory that there may have been some horses in the Middle Kingdom, but there were absolutely no horses in the Old Kingdom when the pyramids happened. Nope, no horses. But the most common theory is that the Hyksos people brought horses to Egypt. It's not 100% confirmed, but we know that at the least Near Eastern people brought horses or traded for horses from the Near East, because horses come from that area. They are not native to Africa. Yes, the Battle of Kadesh is New Kingdom, so that is after the time period that we're talking about right now. Nope, horses are not a desert animal. But yeah, so there's a lot of the kind of biggest phrases is that Hyksos people introduced the horse and chariot to Egypt. And we're going to talk about the chariot part in a little bit, but at the least we know that horses came from the Near East. No, we'll talk about the chariots. It's a little bit confusing, but there were no chariots in Egypt before the Second Intermediate Period as well, for sure. And before the New Kingdom at the least. But we'll talk about the chariots in just a sec, because that's something that is a little bit more debated than the horses. Although the phrase that they introduced the horse and chariot to Egypt is still widely used. Its scholars are now kind of trying to backtrack and say, wait a second. Max, they didn't necessarily lie to you, because if you For the most part, I feel like more movies about ancient Egypt take place in the New Kingdom, which would have had horses and chariots. Like the Battle of Kadesh. Those had horses and chariots. But if you think about imagery from the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, there is no such thing as a horse or a chariot. Oh my god, Map. Great question. Camels are not native to Egypt. Camels are almost never depicted in ancient Egypt. It's the funniest thing. I did a whole TikTok video. Camels are literally almost never, like, there are imagery of camels from the very, very early pre-dynastic, and then there are imagery of camels from the very, very end. But there are almost no images of camels. It's so funny to me how they are so not associated with Egypt at all. It is so funny to me. I did a whole TikTok video about, if you go on TikTok and you search camels and MelissainDeNile, you'll probably find the video that I made about it, because somebody asked me this, and it is one of my biggest annoyances, because you go to Egypt and you want to buy souvenirs and there are always camels in the images of ancient Egypt. Like, they're not there. They weren't there. They were never there. Same thing with lions. Lions is one of the big ones too. They were extinct in Egypt from like the early Old Kingdom. Brought in and imported from other parts in the south, but natively were extinct in Egypt. Okay, so this is one of my favorite parts that I can't believe I almost forgot to include. One of my favorite things that was found in Avaris was only found in 2011, and it is 2 pits full of severed right hands. They were all right hands, and they were all 16 were found in these 2 pits. This is actually a very common ancient Egyptian practice of war, which you can see an image of from, I think that is from the Ramesside period. I think that actually is associated with Ramses II and maybe the Battle of Kadesh. But essentially, soldiers, when they would return from battle, they would present the cut off right hands of an enemy in exchange for gold, for a prize, pretty much. And so it appears that we have evidence that this was done by both Egyptians and the Hyksos during these wars against each other, and obviously later. We do also have imagery of the cutting off of phalluses on the very, very early Narmer palette as well. So the process of cutting something off of your enemy to get a prize is a very common thing that happened. But yeah, I completely forgot about the severed hands, and they're all right hands. Is that my right hand? Yeah, they're all right hands, which you can see, except it's probably switched, but yeah, it was all right hands. And this is my favorite. I love this image of just all the hands piled up. Nobody ever does. I didn't notice that until later. If you look on when all the little bodies up in the upper corner, if they're all laid out, you'll see that there is one body that has this thing sitting on the head, and it's a penis. But yeah, it's so funny because nobody ever notices it. It was my favorite thing when we looked at the actual Narmer palette, and I told my dad, I was like, Dad, look. Dad, look. It was so funny. It was something I never learned about until I was in grad school, and I had to read like 4 papers on the Narmer palette and theories of the Narmer palette, and I was like, please, for the love of God, kill me. So I know way too many things about the Narmer palette that I don't want to know. Were horses associated with Set before the Hyksos? Oh, that's such a great question. Probably not. Probably not. That is such a great question. I will say when I was stumbling upon my research, there does appear to be one theory. Oh, sorry, donkeys. Donkeys, I believe so. Yes. Yes, I believe so. That's a very good question. I think so. I'm not 100% positive, but he's just Set's always associated with so many weird things. I definitely recommend watching that lecture on my YouTube if you're interested in learning more about Set, because Amber did such a great job with like outlining how Set was worshipped like in every single period of ancient Egypt. It was so good. I need to rewatch it honestly again because there's so much great information in there. Hi Vol. Exactly. Yes. So yeah, a little bit earlier, but yeah, none of them really came down to Egypt until much later. Okay, so archaeological conclusions for the site Tel Avaris. Manfred Bytock found a lot of similarities in the architecture, the ceramics, and the burial practices that were found in Avaris to those found in areas of the northern Levantine people. The style of temple architecture, the religious practices, most reflect the areas of these few cities. We have Byblos, Ugarit, Alalak, there we go, Tel Brak. These would put the Hyksos people, if we're just kind of going off of this basis of architecture, religion, in the northernmost Syria and northern Mesopotamia area, which also gets associated with the retinue. The retinue was thought to be northern Syria, almost into Anatolia. So that is kind of where he believes that the Hyksos people may have originally come from. Now, I wanted to do two things. We're gonna watch this video. It's only 3:45. I don't know what is in it, but we're gonna watch this all together. Okay, there's no sound, or there's no, this is a reconstruction of the site. I think made by the Austrian group. Sorry, I'm gonna read this. To the east of the river, in excavation area F-1, a palace-like building of the late Middle Kingdom was excavated. It is surrounded by a suburb and vineyards. So this is a Middle Kingdom site, so even earlier. Its south and east were gardens. I like this music. The main entrance in the north was protected by a porticus. You get to go inside. A staircase led up to the roof of the palace. I guess. Jazz. In the center lies a colonnaded courtyard connected the various building parts, with a water basin in the center. I apologize that you're listening to my chill music and this at the same time. The walls of the room were painted ochre, the ceiling was blue, and the supporting wooden columns were red. Which means they had enough paint to survive. Single-leaf doors set in frames made of stone led into the rooms. What a beautiful room. Oh, and there was a stripe that went around. The east of the building, rows of regularly set flower beds were found in front of a small kiosk. The main river in the west was connected with a huge harbor basin. During the summer months, large areas were covered by the water of the Nile flood. Geophysical investigations show the palace was surrounded by houses. This is a close-up on all those images I was showing you. Oldest part of the town dates back to the early Middle Kingdom, 2000 BCE. Later in the period, a planned settlement and temple were built around the area over there. In the late Middle Kingdom, the town expanded to the south. Due to its intensive trade, the town grew further during the Second Intermediate period, 1700, and reached its greatest expansion during the Hyksos period, 1650. Roxy, we're going to briefly talk about that, so keep that in mind. I like this because you can see the basin harbor, which is like very, very square, and you can tell that maybe something was done to make it that square, like like more man-made. And then here is the Tel El Daba, and there's also these canals, but it's the Pluisaic Nile branch. Evidence from the time are the large palace complexes of Esbet Helmi in the west ancient town. These palaces were decorated with magnificent Minoan wall paintings, like this beautiful frieze showing lions hunting bulls. This ornamental decor once covering the ceiling or wall. Varus was occupied with interruptions until the 22nd century BC. And now all these little Egyptian towns. So, here's the thing, Roxy, that I was going to include in this, and I realized that I technically could not. There is what that second part said. There is a building that has been interpreted as a Minoan temple or a Minoan settlement or a Minoan building that has an almost, not identical, but same exact theme of the bull leaping scene that is found at Knossos. The reason I did not include that in talking about it in this is that I realized when doing this research that it is not a Hyksos dated site. It is dated to after the Hyksos people. So I didn't talk about it, unfortunately, in this lecture, because I thought that that was dating to the Hyksos period, and it is dating almost immediately after. And so it's one of my favorite things to talk about because I love the Minoans. But I honestly, this is what happened. In 2020, I wrote a blog post all about Tel El Daba for a Site Saturday, which was a blog series that I was going to do before I realized that sites are so hard to talk about because they are occupied for thousands of years. And so I did one on Avaris. I'll share you guys the link so you guys can read it. And when I reread it this morning, I realized, oh shoot, this site is not dating to the Hyksos. And so I did not include that in this lecture. But we can do absolutely can do a discussion. If you put that in the Discord, we can absolutely do a discussion about that site because it is in Avaris, but it is not the same. So this is another website. It's kind of old, but this gives you kind of geophysical imagery of the Tel El Daba homepage. Obviously, it has like updates from like 2008 and 2013, but it has this map, and you're allowed to go and click certain parts of the map, and it will tell you more about it. So, clicking the palatial precinct of the Nile branch, and it gives you the whole thing. So here is the Minoan wall painting section. This is the Minoan wall painting reconstructed. It's so very badly preserved, but this is how it has been reconstructed of this bull leaping scene, as well as literally like this is obviously a reconstruction of lots of different stuff, but like a Minoan foot and stuff. But this is just one portion of that, what was a palatial palace in the Middle Kingdom, and then was a palatial palace in the 15th dynasty, and then later had this Minoan structure on here. So feel free to kind of look through all of this. Eventually you can go like they go through so much, and there are so much documented cases about it, and it's very open. They have a bibliography and stuff. every single small little section you want to learn more about. Like, this is, I think, the temple that's over in this area. It is kind of all there. It also gives this, which is really hard to see and kind of hard to understand. But this is the relative chronology of the site. So you see that you have the year BCE on this side. You have the Middle Bronze Age phases, Late Bronze Age 1, Middle Bronze Age 2, blah, 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 blah. And you also have the Egyptian relative chronology with the dynasties, and then you see Hyksos. And essentially, they've sectioned it off into R1, F1, A1, A5, and then they're telling you, okay, this section, the town center and the news center, was on hiatus up until this. But then with the conquest of Avaris, this is all the sections that they delineated. It's this crazy, like, chart. But yeah, this has lots and lots of information. So please check that out, and I can share. Oh, actually, I'll share. This is my Site Saturday link as well. There's a ton of links at the bottom of this, as well as there are there are three full documents that you can download. There is the Avaris, Capital of the Hyksos by Manfred Bytok. There's the Chronology of Tel el-Dabba by Manfred. And then there's the Wall Paintings of Tel el-Dabba, the Potential Aegean Connections, which is all about the Minoans and such. And then lots and more sources, although I have found some of these links don't work because this was written in 2020. So long time ago. Okay. Second to last end part of this. I think we're still making good time. Now that we've kind of looked at how they were interpreted in the past and the physical evidence that we have of this site, how are the Hyksos being interpreted now? And this is essentially, this is not the truth that I'm going to tell you, but this is the best guess of what we're going to tell you. The Hyksos in general are now interpreted as Canaanites or general Levantine people who settled in the Nile Delta peacefully, not invaders. There was no invasion of an entire foreign population. The archaeology of Avaris actually shows us that there was a gradual settlement of this city by Asiatic immigrants beginning around 1800 BCE, and essentially that's 150 years before the beginning of the actual Hyksos rule. Is that what happens every time? What is that? The leopard invasion. The leopard invasion. So, most likely, yes. This continuous Asiatic presence in Avaris started during ancient Egyptian rule, and their immigration might have been encouraged as they worked as sailors, soldiers, shipbuilders, craftsmen, merchants, and they were working under the Egyptian crown. And probably, remember, there was a site here in the Middle Kingdom. And so this is one of the first major cities that you would find after you've crossed the Sinai Peninsula. So, hey man, settle in here, or you can go somewhere else, but start here. This is a great place to settle down a little bit if you are looking for just a different life. Now, essentially, when you look at these images from the tomb of Khnumhotep II, which dates to this 12th dynasty, everything makes a little bit more sense. We now know that there were people from this area settling in Egypt in the 12th dynasty. And so this image of these people bringing tribute to the pharaoh could be people just bringing tribute and then they're going home. But it could also be people bringing tribute and then deciding to stay. Um, Baitak has a really great quote about the Hyksos, is that they should be understood within a repetitive pattern of the attraction of Egypt for West... Oh, there's an ad. I think the ad ended. Probably. Yes. No. Maybe so. Okay. Back to the next quote. Make sure I actually swallow. So Manfred Beitak argues that the Hyksos, quote, should be understood within a repetitive pattern of the attraction of Egypt for Western Asiatic population groups that came in search of living in a country, especially the Delta, since prehistoric times. That this was an attractive place for Asiatics to come and settle. So, one of the really big inciting incidences into how the Hyksos kings themselves began to actually rule was the death of the final very powerful pharaoh of the 13th dynasty, Sobek-Hotep IV. This was sometime around 1725 BCE. His death essentially appears to cause this splintering effect within the leadership of Egypt at that time, and then that includes this one group in Avaris that essentially was able to rise up and take power of the northern area. Many of the names of these 14th dynasty pharaohs. Hi, America's Problem. Welcome on in. We're talking about the Hyksos today. Thank you so much for the heart, me. These 14th dynasty pharaohs, many of these names don't appear to be actually Egyptian. So this actually leads us to believe that some of these 14th dynasty pharaohs were actually of Levantine origin as well. And we know that they lived in Avaris and that there was a palace in the 14th dynasty, and there was some sort of unknown event which caused their palace to burn down. And essentially what happened after that was that the 15th dynasty rulers come in. We don't know enough about the 14th dynasty and the 15th dynasty Hyksos rulers to be able to truly put them in actual order, which I'm going to show you guys in a second. And so it's not totally clear. Thank you, America's Problem, for the 10 roses. It's not totally clear why there was this transition of power, why we have delineated the 14th from the 15th dynasty and not just put it all in one dynasty. But there are some Egyptologists that argue that the 15th dynasty rulers actually invaded and displaced the 14th. But others argue there's literally no evidence of that. So how are we really going to know the difference between the two groups? It's kind of unclear. So, based on the Turin Kings list, there are 6 Hyksos kings that ruled for 108 years. If you don't know what the Turin Kings list is, this is a extremely fragmented papyrus that is currently at the Turin Museum, and it lists supposedly every name of every Egyptian pharaoh in order, and I believe also gives the amount of years that they ruled. I'm not 100% sure on that, but as you can see, it's so fragmented. And so there is actually, although it sort of includes 6 spaces for 6 kings, there is only actually one king listed on, that his name is actually preserved. And so the rest of them are added to essentially by other sources like Manetho's writing. There are some scholars that argue that it was actually closer to 149 years, and then somebody else says closer between like 160 and 180. Who knows? Over 100 years, less than 200 years, somewhere in between there. So the Turin Kings list and then the Manetho's list of kings gets combined together. Unfortunately, Manetho's list is semi-corrupted. One, because obviously we're looking at quotations of his actual text, but he also is writing a lot of them in Greek. And so sometimes it's really easy to figure out which king it is, and sometimes it's hard. The rest of the names of these Hyksos pharaohs are only found on archaeological materials where their name is labeled. Though there are some kings that we literally only have one example of their name. And there are 3 exceptions to those. So, here are some of the names of the 14th and 15th dynasty pharaohs, along with some of the imagery as to where they are. And you can see that there are so many comments that their chronological position is contested. And it's impossible to know, especially when some of these ones on the 14th dynasty are like literally that scarab, the only object that has their name on it. So we have Yakbim, Sekha and Re, Yaamu, Nub Wasser Re, Kare, Kawasere, Amu, Hotebre, Seshi Ma'ibre. If you might notice, the first name does not sound very Egyptian, which is what I said earlier. But the second name sounds a little bit more Egyptian, and it might be that it is literally like a throne name versus the personal name. And so we have all of these different names. So Seshi Ma'ibre is attested on over 300 scarab seals. He possibly was married to someone named Queen Tati, who's a Kushite. And these might be, 2 of these guys, or 3 of these guys might be vassals of the 15th dynasty. Then we got the 15th dynasty. We have, I have never said any of these guys' names. Salitis, Semken, which we talked about before, Aper Annat, Cayenne, which we talked about a lot, Yanasi, Sakirhar, Apophis, or Apep, and Kamudi. And so Salitis is mentioned by Manetho as the first king of the dynasty, but he is unidentified without any known archaeological attested things. And that so he supposedly ruled for 19 years, according to Manetho, as quoted by Josephus. Sekhem is mentioned on the Turin Kings list, and according to Rialt, he was the earliest Hyksos king, probably the first king of this dynasty. Somebody else assigns him to the 16th dynasty. Aper Annat was mentioned in the Turin Kings list, and he was an early Hyksos ruler, possibly the second king. Somebody else says he's 16th. Cayenne ruled for 10 plus years. He is obviously one of the big guys. We have his name in a lot of different places. Yanasi is possibly Cayenne's eldest son, and he is probably the origin of the mention of King Ioannis in Manetho's Egyptiaca. Then there's Sakir Har, named as a Hyksos king on a door jamb found in Avaris, but have no idea where he sort of fits in this. And then Apophis, we think, is one of the last, Kamundi maybe being the last pharaoh of that dynasty. The best known kings that we know about are Cayenne and Apepi/Apophis, as he is mainly the main king to fight the 17th dynasty. So, while Avaris always seemed to be the capital, other sites have been found to have strong Levantine connections, like Tel Farsha, Tel El Magud, Tel El Kanatana, and Inshaz. Tel El Mashukta shows a great deal of Levantine pottery, and Tel Rataba and Tel El Shaba show possibly Hyksos-style burials and occupations. Now, Although Hyksos people claim to be rulers of both Lower and Upper Egypt in some ancient texts, their southern border was probably marked by Hermopolis, which is just a little bit south of, I think, here? Or is Hermopolis? I always get Heliopolis and Hermopolis mixed up, but we know that there are Hyksos objects that are found in Lower Egypt that could indicate that they occupied portions of Lower Egypt, but it also could be like Theban war booty or trade or diplomatic contact. Think about that dagger handle that we saw that was found in Thebes. Was probably for a soldier of the Hyksos, but was probably taken as booty by a Theban soldier. And you can see a lot of the sites are very close to where Avaris is at the moment. So in general, the Hyksos people showed a very distinct mix of Egyptian and Levantine cultural traits. They adopted the full ancient Egyptian royal titulary and employed ancient Egyptian scribes and officials. This isn't much of a surprise because they had been slowly immigrating and integrating with the Egyptians already in the Delta, and they were learning the language, and they were hiring scribes, and they were intermixing essentially with the Egyptians that were already there. But when they actually started ruling in this area, they actually used Near Eastern forms of administration, such as employing a chancellor or a emir ketetmet as the head of the administration, which is not something that normally ancient Egyptians would do. Cuneiform letters have also been found in Avaris, confirming that there was this long-distance diplomacy with the Near East and also Crete. And as I mentioned earlier, Hyksos objects have been found in Baghdad, in Knossos, in Crete, mainly from King Khayyam. There's evidence of some friendly relationships between the earlier Theban kings. There was even evidence of a possible marriage alliance before the reign of the Theban pharaoh Senkeneri Tau, who we're going to talk about a lot next. And we also know that there may have been an alliance between the Hyksos and the Kushites, or the people who were living in the area of Nubia to the south of Egypt in modern-day Sudan. There is something called the Carnarvon tablet, which is one of the Kamos stela that we're also going to talk about later. Oh no, I did see that, Roxy. Yeah, there's lots of other things that have been found. Trade in Egypt was huge, especially getting into like the New Kingdom and later. And there were lots of different items coming from lots and lots of different places. This Carnarvon tablet was interpreted as evidence of this alliance, as it contains text of an intercepted letter between Apepi and the king of Kush. And this may have been one of the reasons why the Theban kings rose up to try to take the Hyksos people down, because they were potentially trapped between two allied nations. And we're going to talk about this more when we talk about the actual war at the very, very end of the lecture. Oh, there we go. That's one of the Kamos stela that gives us so much detail of maybe what happened during the war. In general, the Hyksos were also importing and exporting a wide array of items. Oh, that's why I had this. In the Kamos stela, it actually says that, and I quote, the Hyksos imported chariots and horses, ships, timber, gold, lapis lazuli, silver, turquoise, bronze, axes without number, oil, incense, fat, and honey. But also remember, this is a text from the opposing side, so maybe they're trying to say that they overexerted, that they were really fancy and had so much power that they were importing so many stuff. Who knows? Mooncloud, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome on in. We're talking about the Hyksos people tonight. We do know that they were exporting items that had possibly been looted from other parts of ancient Egypt and then recarved, such as all of the statues we've been talking about and the sphinxes we've been talking about. We also do suspect that at least closer to the actual, like, kind of end of the Hyksos rule, when tensions were really high with the Thebans, that there may have been a trade boycott between Upper and Lower Egypt, because, like, kind of they were not getting along, so they had sort of trade boycott. Might have been another reason why the Thebans may have wanted the north of Egypt back, because the Hyksos were hogging and cutting off all of the trade between the Mediterranean and the Near East with the southern Egypt. I also mentioned at the very, very beginning that they were introducing certain technologies to Egypt. The horse and chariot, which I've been mentioning off and on, are usually attributed to them, but oddly, there is no archaeological, pictorial, or textual evidence to say that the Hyksos possessed actual chariots. So this is the very interesting thing that, like, I was teasing earlier, is that, like, there's no evidence that the Hyksos themselves had chariots, even though we know that chariots were not introduced to Egypt until at least the time period of the Hyksos people. And we obviously know that, look, we talked about the horse burials and the donkey burials that were very, very common in Avaris. We know that they at least brought horses to Egypt, but they may have been here a little bit earlier. And so we know chariots come from the Near East, but there's not enough evidence to actually say the Hyksos people, the rulers of the 15th dynasty, were the people who brought them over. Which to me makes a lot of sense, because there's the possibility that why did the Egyptians have them, the Theban Egyptians, when they were fighting the Hyksos, but the Hyksos themselves did not have them? Yes, I think that is a possibility, but we don't have literally any evidence that they themselves did it. I think the more likely possibility is that the Hyksos themselves just didn't use them. Somebody may have come, like, with them and told other people about them, and then somebody else started making them, or they were the middleman of this chariot trade. Yes, Vol. And so, like, we know that chariots are coming from the Near East, around the Black Sea, and in that area where horses are also, like, being more bred and worked. And so it's the thing is that the Hyksos may have been the people who carried this information over, but it does not seem that they themselves actually used chariots. And granted, this entire lecture is, we don't know everything, and who knows, there might eventually something come up that does tell us. Like, technically, yes, does the Compostela say that they imported horses and chariots? Yes. That is probably the only evidence that we have, is just that statement, but it doesn't say they use them. So, I have not played Age of Empires Not Disclosed. I am not a warfare / city builder gamer. I am much more a story-based player, so there are some games that, even though they are history themed, I will probably never play. And I believe Age of Empires falls into that qualifier. Yeah, exactly, Mooncloud. Like, there's a possibility that something will be found. It's just, at this moment, there is no evidence of this. But we obviously know that chariots get here. And so it's just almost a coincidence that, like, they appear during the Hyksos period in Egypt. And so I think people automatically assume that, oh, well, those people are coming from the Near East where chariots were invented, so they must start bringing them, right? Right? But yeah. Yep, well, they just weren't in Egypt at that time. Although, actually, no, we are in, 17th century is 1800. We're in the 1700s BCE. So, very close. Yeah, exactly. No, it's very true, Max. This is all good conjecture and stuff. I'm just giving you the physical We don't got anything physical, but yes, these are all possibilities of what could have happened. Okay. They have also been credited with inventing the sickle sword, or the khopesh. Khopesh is the ancient Egyptian word, which you can see up there in the corner. And then possibly inventing or at least bringing over to Egypt the composite bow. Though the composite bow seems to be very divided and such. And the other thing we have is this duckbill shaped axe, which is the Syrio-Palestinian type that was probably introduced by the Hyksos to Egypt. And then we also have a Hyksos bronze spearhead. There is some theories that the Hyksos people, I know, man. I know, right? Like, if you look at all the things, there are no Khopeshes until after the Hyksos period. And I'm afraid that a lot of these like attributations to the Hyksos people that like they are now introducing them, I fear that it is just because you don't see a Khopesh before the Hyksos period and you do see a Khopesh afterwards. I'm afraid that is what probably scholars have done, then actually had a little bit more stronger evidence for that. But it's hard to say, obviously. Coincidence is not proof of causation. Yeah, exactly. I am worried that is why a lot of these things kind of appear. Like, I think the horse, when we're going down the list of what is the most probable, I think horse is the highest because we do have horse burials at Avaris. But the more I look into some of these, the more I'm just like, I feel like we're kind of just saying they weren't here before and now they're here after. And so it's very hard to kind of say. Vol, thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much. Please enjoy all those emotes. Fuel for forging metal. Fire. The Egyptians were pretty good at, like, fire, coal, wood. Well, they don't got a lot of wood, but they got some stuff. But yeah, not 100% sure. Yeah, probably dung. Dung is probably an option for sure. The Egyptians are not ones for attributing high, they never really could get their forges or their kilns to a very, very high temperature. It's why glass is not really found in Egypt, even though they had so much goddamn sand. Like, faience itself is sort of a glass, it's a silica type material, but it's not like glass. Glass items are really introduced later, either by other Near Eastern groups, and then it gets way more heightened in the Greco-Roman period. But they never really were able to kind of perfect a high temperature kiln that is really needed for like glass making and stuff. Okay. Where are we? We're so close to the end. 11:09. I think we're making good time. I don't have work tomorrow either, so we can go later, obviously. So yes, there is possibly some evidence that they may have had a slightly more advanced bronze working, and then possibly also that they were wearing more full body armor, which doesn't really appear in Egypt until after the New Kingdom. But again, is this just conjecture? Probably. Possibly. Who the hell fucking knows? And then, just like other aspects of their culture, their religion was very mixed between the two culture. I told you about the combination temples for Set, Baal, Hadad, and then Hathor and Asherah. But there were also votive objects given by Hyksos rulers to gods like Ra, Sobek, Wajet. and that the temples themselves in Avaris seem to have been made in both Egyptian and Levantine styles. So, we're finally at the end. We're almost at the end. Let's talk about the end of the Hyksos. And I know people probably want to talk about this the most, because I think this is just the coolest part about this whole story, is the war with the 17th dynasty pharaohs. And I'm trying to put in any and all textual evidence that I have for these battles, but you always have to remember, we have literally zero textual evidence from the Hyksos side. Everything we have is from the Egyptian side. History is written by the winners. Everything the Egyptians might say might be sugarcoating, might be boasting, might be straight up lying. The war in the Egyptian perspective is very much talked about as propaganda to specifically portray this conflict as a war of national liberation. And another very similar to, oh my goodness, Nat! Hello, my love. Welcome on in, 27 months. Hello, my friend. You just got to the juicy part of the lecture, which is great. But thank you so much, my love. Oh my goodness, incoming hype train. Wouldn't that be lovely? We're going to be talking about the war of the Hyksos and the 17th dynasty Thebans. So they're using this conflict to talk about this like modern liberation of the North, as well as a uniter of the South and North, very similar to pharaohs like Narmer, who did that, and also who's the other one? Mentuhotep II in the Middle Kingdom. Like, these people are these uniters of Egypt, because usually during these intermediate periods, the way that Egyptologists have classified it is that these are time periods where everything is kind of unrest. All of Egypt is not being controlled by one person. Lots of different stuff. So, hostilities began during the reign of the 17th dynasty pharaoh Senkeneri-Tau. Although it's unclear why the hostilities started. I've already laid out a couple options that we were talking about. The possibility that the Hyksos were working with Kushite kings, the possibility of trade getting cut off, and the possibility of like a blockade. Like, things seemed possibly dire. It also could just be that the Egyptian kings wanted all of Egypt. Very easily they could have just said, well, my previous pharaohs, they had all of Egypt. Why can't I have all of Egypt? Like, who knows? Who knows what his intentions are? I personally think that the 17th dynasty kings were probably the ones who engaged in the fight. But that just might be a little bit of a bias, because I feel like the Hyksos have been so, like, they've been misunderstood. Like, everybody thought that they were these evil, like, invaders, and they really weren't. They were just people who wanted to live in Egypt. So I might just be, like, always playing for the little guy. But no matter what, there seems to have had a large battle. It is unclear where, it is unclear necessarily when, why, all of these different things. But there seems to have been a battle between the Hyksos people and the 17th dynasty pharaohs, specifically Senkeneri-Tau and his soldiers. Trigger warning for human remains. I know I forgot to give the trigger warning earlier, but this one is a little bit more gory. So, this is the mummified skull of Senkeneri-Tau. His mummy was discovered in the Deir el-Bahri cache in 1881 and was unwrapped in 1886. It shows that there are several blows of an axe to the head, mostly the forehead, and then a cut from a dagger to the neck. The shapes of these cuts to the forehead actually match the specialized shape of a Hyksos axe head. A Hyksos axe head was a different shape than an ancient Egyptian axe head. And there was a very recent study where they were lined up and it most likely fit a Hyksos axe head, which had a, I'm trying to remember, it has a, does it have a point? I gotta look it up later. I can't remember what the difference is between the two. I think an Egyptian one looks like an actual, like a modern day axe, where it kind of goes out and has a curve, and a Hyksos axe head I think was like pointier. I gotta look it up again because I can't remember. Yeah, probably map. It is also proposed that he possibly was prone when his neck was cut, indicating that he could have been hit first with the axe head and then was laying prone, and they cut his, stabbed him in the neck. Here is a lovely CT scan, also what he looks like now, which is fucking crazy because they put all of this wrapping on the top of his head that's just like so odd. It is pointy of axis? Okay, thanks. Yeah, it is, alright, sorry. I'm gonna look it up for a split second, so everyone can see it. Hyksos axe. See, I'm trying to, so the problem, come on. I've seen other images. Ah, here we go. This is a Hyksos shaped battle axe. It is much wider and has this minus the also duck bill as well. And then the more Egyptian style axe head is the one that I showed you guys earlier, which is this is one from Ahmose the First. And so this is the more typical Egyptian versus Hyksos. Slightly different shaped, and then they also have the duckbill one as well. This is another version of the duckbill, so more pointy as well. So 2 to 3 different options for those. Hi Hurt, welcome. We're talking about the Hyksos people, and currently we're looking at the mummy of Senkeneri Tau, an ancient Egyptian pharaoh from the 17th dynasty who was most likely killed by the Hyksos. The 3 major proposals as to how he died has been played out in 3 different options. So number 1, he died in battle, like an active battle with the Hyksos people. Number 2, he was killed in his sleep, probably still by the Hyksos, but was laying prone, was hit with an axe, was cut with a neck while he was laying down sleeping. Or number 3 is that he was captured and then executed by the Hyksos, which possibly could indicate that the wound to the head was found earlier and then the knife cut was the execution, or both of them were done at the same time. All 3 are very plausible, and no matter what, it does point very close to the Hyksos people killing him. Very interestingly, you can see sort of from the mummy here, his CT scan, no, these are CT scans. It just makes the skull white. His skull actually looks like this, and this is a black and white photo. You can still see a little bit of hair too. He was mummified very hastily and very quickly, and not very well. His face is in pretty good condition, but his eyes are not very well. I will say the option where he was captured and killed and executed, that one I find to be slightly the least likely. I don't know, I'm back and forth on that one because I think that there's a lot of good points to it, but I do find it odd that like he would be executed and then his body would be sent back to the Egyptians, because he was found in an Egyptian technically an Egyptian cache, but he had his own tomb. And so I don't think it's the worst thing, because I think you still, if you execute a king, you got to send proof that he's actually dead, right? And so sending back his body is like an okay thing. Yeah, that's also part of that theory, is that it was a sloppy execution in some ways. But the 2001 or 2021 CT scan shows that his hands are actually very deformed. You can sort of see it in the smaller picture at the bottom, but that they actually theorize that it might be because his hands were tied, and for like a long portion of time that it was deformed when he was deceased, which is very interesting and would really support the captured and imprisoned option. I also wanted to share this because this is a really funny, technically primary source. I will technically call it a secondary source, but there is a story, a fictionalized story that dates to the New Kingdom. So after all of the Hyksos shit goes down, and it might indicate what happened to the start of the war, but it is highly, highly fictionalized. It is a story called The Quarrel of Apophis and Senkenere. It blames the Hyksos ruler Apepi or Apophis for initiating conflict between the two by specifically demanding that Senkenere Tau remove a pool of hippos near Thebes. And if I remember correctly, it's specifically because this pool of hippos is too loud and that they could hear them all the way from the north. If I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Yeah, Max, sorry. We talked all about this at the very, very beginning. The way that we are using Hyksos in this case is that in academia now, the word Hyksos is only meant to refer to the rulers of the 14th and 15th dynasty in Egypt. No, you're totally fine, Max. But please, this will eventually get posted to my YouTube, so if you want to rehash all of the beginning stuff, but one of the things I talked about at the very beginning was talking about the name and how there are multiple names that seem to be these very wide sweeping names to cover all of these different people. But this will eventually go on my YouTube, and so you can watch it back from the beginning if you want a little bit more context. But yeah, they're not really associated with the Sea Peoples necessarily, because the Sea Peoples is a different intermediate period. I believe it is the third, but I always get it wrong because I know nothing about the Sea Peoples. But yeah, we talked about the Hyksos is just it literally just means ruler of a foreign nation. That is what the word Hyksos means. Hekakasut or Hekakasu. That's what that means. So it's very complicated. All of this is, we don't know anything. That's the whole point of this. But yeah, so most likely this story, the Quarrel of Apophis and Senkenere, is like this satire of both the storytelling genre that you have with in the New Kingdom. You have a lot of these stories. But it's also slightly a reference to the Battle of Set and Horus, especially because Set is so associated with the Hyksos people and Horus would be associated with the Thebans. And so this is literally like a satire on like, oh, the like this is just a more legit story of the Battle of Set and Horus. All right, there's an ad starting in a couple seconds, but hi Sparky Pugwash, welcome on in. We are talking about the Hyksos people, and we're talking about the war against the Hyksos by the seventh. Oh, I know, Max. We're gonna redo our whole ads thing. I just need like 10 seconds to myself and not have to think about all the things I have to do. And we're gonna redo it, but I'm trying to be better at not talking through the ads. So there should be one coming up. We're planning to rearrange it where there's like like a full 3-minute ad, and I take like a full break, and everyone takes like a full break to just like mentally stop, and so that they don't happen as often, but they are longer. It still hasn't said it started. That's fine, Max. I wish I was drinking. I should have drank something with eyebrows like this. I forgot to tell you guys about that. I saw a man with eyebrow hair that was, I'm not even joking you, this long. That long. All right, now there's an ad. All right. They were drawn to make it that thick. I have such thick eyebrows. My dad always used to tell me that he was jealous of my eyebrows, and that was because one day I looked up and I realized my dad doesn't have any eyebrows anymore. They're gone. Okay. So the Hyksos and Senkeneri-Tau battle it out. Senkeneri-Tau dies in battle or something to do with the Hyksos people. They're like, whoop-de-doodle, we won. This is great. I think that's what my dad's eyebrows are like. So 3 years after the death of Senkeneri-Tau, his successor, this guy named Hamos, initiates a campaign against several cities loyal to the Hyksos people. This is documented in 3 monumental stela that were set up at Karnak, which we talked about are called the Kamos stela. The first one is also called the Carnarvon tablet, and we talked about that one. But within this Carnarvon tablet, we have this complaint made by Kamos about the divided state of Egypt, and this is the quote. "To what effect do I perceive it, my might, while a ruler is in Avaris and another in Cush, I sitting joined with an Asiatic and a Nubian, each man having his own portion of this Egypt, sharing the land with me. There is no passing him as far as Memphis, the water of Egypt. He has possession of Hermopolis, and no man can rest, being deprived of the levies of the Setiu. I shall engage in battle with him, and I shall slit his body, for my intention is to save Egypt, striking the Asiatics." Very cool, Vol. I've learned new things. Mixture of manure and wood. That would make sense. They don't got a lot of wood, but they do. All the wood that they do have can barely be used for anything else, so it might as well be used for fuel. So Kamos comes out straight up and is like, I don't like that there are 2 other people in ruling my Egypt, quote unquote. And he both references the Cushites or the Nubians and the Hyksos people. In this text, it continues on where Kamos's advisors try to dissuade him, but he decides to attack anyway. And this part is probably not true. It's actually a very common literary device in Egyptian literature, which is just like, I am gonna do this thing, and the advisors are like, no, don't do it. And he goes, I'm gonna do it anyway. And they're like, okay, fine. Like, that's just something that is repeated in a lot of different literature in Egypt, and so it's not probably true. The advisors were probably like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. Continuing, the stela talks about the destruction of the city of Nirusi, which is in Middle Egypt and was allied with the Hyksos. On the next stela, Kamos claims to have captured Avaris, but then returns to Thebes after receiving a message between Apepi and the kingdom of Cush. He actually not receives it, he intercepts it. He intercepts this message between the Hyksos king Apepi and a king of Cush. And he's been very worried about their alliance, and then if he was going to be attacked from the south. And so this is why he claims to have left Avaris after he conquered it. The very, very interesting thing is a lot of scholars don't believe that Kamos himself actually attacked Avaris, because in the text, he is talking about all of these cities that he's slowly kind of making his way up to Egypt, or up to the north. He doesn't mention any of the cities like past a certain point, past Narusi, which is in like middle Egypt. He doesn't mention any of those cities like Memphis, like all of those cities all the way up to get to Tel el Daba / Avaris. And scholars actually think that this text might have been him explaining what he is going to do, and then essentially was intercepted with this letter, and so that he didn't ever go to Avaris. And we don't actually have any archaeological evidence that the city was sieged at this point in time. And then unfortunately what happens is Kamos dies kind of unexpectedly. He possibly only ruled, definitively he only ruled 3 years, because his invasion, quote unquote, of Avaris was in year 3 of his reign. Some people suspect he may have ruled up to 5 years, but the way that we determine a lot of ways how long a pharaoh ruled is via textual evidence, because they date certain goods like wine with year 3 of Kamos's reign. That's how they would date things. Like, there's no such thing as years in ancient Egypt. It's always the years of a reign. And so we don't have any evidence of a year 4 or a year 5, though some people think there might have been. So he dies. Like, and hey, well, I guess the Hyksoses win out again. I wish I could find a better photo of this, because this is one of my favorite. There's a artist who did a lot of like kind of experimental drawings of ancient Egyptian pharaohs and such, and they definitely did whitewash them a little bit, but I do think they are just like a very beautiful, I think they're so pretty. This is most likely, this is an image of Senkeneri Tau dead on the battlefield, with probably Kamos standing here, and then his mother, most likely Ahahotep the First. It is believed that after Kamos's death, Ahahotep ruled as a regent for her son for a few years, until Pharaoh Ahmose I takes the throne. Ahahotep is a very, very interesting character. Unfortunately, there is something called the Ahahotep problem, in which there are 2 women named Ahahotep from this same time period, and it is extremely hard to figure out if they are the same person or if they are different people, and if they are different people, who are they married to, who are they mothers to. But a lot of the really great archaeological items we have from the 17th dynasty are from Ahahotep's tomb. We have so many cool gold items with the names of her sons and her husband and her family members on it. I probably might do a discussion stream on her, because she's really, really cool. I do also have a blog post about her, I believe, for my Woman Crush Wednesday on MelissainDeNile, my blog website. So we think that she took the throne for a little bit, and then Ahmose I takes the throne. He eventually then continues the war against the Hyksos, probably in a way trying to like, I don't know, redeem his dad and his brother, who probably died during these battles, and so he really wants to kind of fix everything. So he was able to conquer Memphis, Tijaru, and Heliopolis, which are all at the base of the Nile Delta, very, very early in his reign. And I don't think, wait, did I do a picture of this? No. Most of the textual evidence of his campaign actually comes from a tomb of a man named Ahmose, not Ahmose I, but Amos, son of Ibana. Amos, son of Ibana, had no relationship to the king, and he definitely was, he was probably a soldier, he was probably somehow heavily involved, but no, like, biological relation to the king, and his tomb gives a first-hand account of Amos I's sacking of Aras. And I quote, Then there was fighting in Egypt to the south of this town of Aras. And I carried off a man as a living captive. I went into the water, for he was captured on the city side, and crossed the water carrying him. Then Avaris was despoiled, and I brought spoil from there. So he was probably a soldier, a general, some sort of military position. There's definitely more to that text, and I might be able to find like a full translation, but I will see what I can do. But this entire encounter is believed to be in the 18th year of Amos I's reign. What is also interesting is that archaeologically, there is no widespread destruction of Avaris when you are looking at it archaeologically. Instead, it looks like the city was actually abandoned. And if we think back to the Manetho quote about what happens after this war, he mentions that the Hyksos were expelled, which we also don't have any archaeological evidence for this as well. So what it appears to have happened is essentially the Hyksos were either killed, executed. The rulers were most likely taken as slaves or killed, executed, but the rest of the Hyksos people and the people who were settling in Avaris appear to essentially have just resettled in other locations in Egypt. And we have some evidence that the Canaanite cult centers that were in Avaris, like the Temple of Set and Baal, were still actually active after that time. And that many people stayed in and around this area. And obviously there was enough people later for them to build an entire new capital of Pi-Ramesses very shortly after. But that is kind of the conclusion of the war. It's a little unceremonious, but it is really that, like, Amos I defeats the Hyksos, thus becoming the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, and the new kingdom. That's like the big thing. It's that not just the 18th dynasty, but it is the beginning of the new kingdom. It is when Egypt is fully restored. It's all united. He has the north and the south. But it does appear that the people still settled. Like, we still have evidence of this Levantine pottery being used after. Avaris still seems to be sort of active, and then later becomes parts of Pi-Ramesses. And so seemingly that is like kind of the truth of the story, but obviously there are so many unknowns. Honestly, if Avaris was not located in the Delta, it would have had so much more preserved material. We would probably have a lot more accurate information. But at the same time, the Egyptians also could have been truthful for once, and that would also have given us more accurate information. This is kind of the end. I really hope you guys learned a little bit about the Hyksos people, how they've been interpreted over time, and how, honestly, it may have changed your perception. I know that phrase, the Hyksos invaders, is still around. I actually, when I was Googling, I found two what seemed like modern copies of books, which were literally titled Hyksos, Invaders of Egypt, and one was Invaders of Egypt, the Hyksos, the Sea Peoples, and the Assyrians. And I was like, okay, these look like modern books. They should not have those titles because they are not invaders.